As we exited the 5Ds era, the meta had seemingly focused itself. Reborn Tenku had become the face of the format, being able to replace itself easily when removed from the field, making it prime synchro material. In addition to this, many other decks were on the cusp of viability, such as TG Stun, Gravekeeper, and Agents, with many others waiting in the wing. This would lead into the first set of the Zexal era, and though its shakeups wouldn't be as impactful as the Duelist Genesis before it, it was about to set the stage for a fan favorite format. Generation Force. Release date August 16th, 2011. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Wind Up, Hero, Exceeds. Impact Playing the new era safe. Generation Force would be the official start of the Zexal era of Yu-Gi-Oh! And similarly to Duelist Genesis before it, it aimed to introduce power players into the format to kick off the new Exceed mechanic in full. But notably, the initial wave it brought would be significantly weaker than Synchros before them, as Konami didn't want a repeat of the Teledad situation all over again. In the initial wave of generic Exceeds, we received number 17 Leviathan Dragon, a rank 3 that can detach a material to gain 500 attack, but can't attack directly if it has no materials. Levier the Sea Dragon, a rank 3 that can detach a material to summon a banished monster once per turn. Tiras, Keeper of Genesis, a rank 5 that destroys a card on field at the end of the battle phase if it battled and can't be destroyed by card effects, losing these effects if it's out of materials, detaching one at the end of your end phase. And Adrius, Keeper of Armageddon, a TCG exclusive rank 5 that could detach a material to pop a face-up card on field once per turn. These cards, while solid for an introduction, were notably weaker than the intro wave of Synchros, primarily with the two most useful power pushes being locked in the rank 5 pool, which was harder to access, but the Exceed pool was still a solid starting point, with all finding use in the meta. Wind Up would be the premier Exceed archetype pushed here, being a series of monsters that could only use their effects once while on field each, with Magician summoning a Wind Up from deck if a Wind Up used an effect, Juggler able to destroy a card at battles after damage calculation, Zen Meister, a rank 4 that gains 300 attack for each material it has and can detach one to flip a monster down until the end phase, either able to stun a monster the opponent has to clear it or reset a Wind Up effect, and Factory, adding a Wind Up from deck to hand once per turn when a Wind Up effect is used. While not great now, Wind Up would gain more and more support over the coming sets to rise into their place in the meta, though it was clearly going to take some time, as the most useful piece right now was Zen Meister, being a generic rank 4 for other decks to utilize. Moving into more one-off pieces, Goblinberg would be a swarm tool for various decks, able to special summon a level 4 or lower from hand, then swap itself into defense mode, being useful, but notably would cause some effects to miss timing due to the defense swap after the summon. Wonder Wand could equip onto any spellcaster, boosting its attack by 500, but more notably able to send itself and the monster to grave to draw 2, being a decent draw tool for various spellcaster-focused decks. Surface could special summon a level 3 or lower Fish, Sea Serpent, or Aqua from grave, being useful for some Frog and Fish OTK builds as an extension piece. Moving into the TCG exclusives, Sea Lancer was an interesting card that could once while on field equip as many banished Fish, Sea Serpent, and Aqua monsters to it as possible, gaining 1000 attack while having a monster equipped this way and able to prevent destruction by sending one equipped to grave. Sea Lancer would see experimentation alongside the Frog engine thanks to Ronin Tonin banishing various Aqua monsters to summon itself, giving Lancer a monster to tribute over to summon and a target to equip on, spawning the rogue deck of Sea Lancer Frogs this way. Orient Dragon was a level 6 synchro that, on summon, banishes a synchro the opponent controls, being an odd counter choice for extra decks. Lastly are the OCG imports, which would mostly be focused on importing a series of hero cards, all adaptations from the GX manga, being Aster's Vision Heroes Trinity and Adoration, generic fusions of 2 or 3 heroes with Adoration able to drop an opponent's attack by the attack of another hero you control, and Trinity doubling its attack the turn it's summoned, unable to attack directly, but able to attack 3 times on monsters in a turn, Elemental Hero Nova Master, the Fire Attribute Omni Hero, able to draw a card if it destroys a monster in battle, the Masked Heroes, being a series of fusions summonable by using the spell Mask Change on a hero of their attribute, with the only targets here being Goka, a fire target that gains 100 attack for each hero in grave, and Vapor, who can't be destroyed by card effects, and a Hero Lives, which pays half your life points while you control no monsters to summon an elemental hero from deck. While Hero would get a massive wave here, none of these cards would make Hero in the meta any more playable, but it would plant the seeds for potential in the future with new Hero support focuses. The last OCG import here was Steel Swarm Roach, an Exceed for the upcoming Hidden Arsenal archetype that could detach a material to negate the inherent special summon of a level 5 or higher monster, being useful for stopping synchro spam strategies. Directly following this release would be the first wave of Collectible Tins 2011, which in addition to their easy access reprints of Leviathan and Zenmeister would be the first yearly collectible tins to also bring promos. With notable reprints in here being Beast King Barbaros, Stygian Street Patrol, Pot of Duality, Archlord Christia, and Elemental Hero Gaia, with Duality specifically being a massive reprint here due to the price of the meta staple at this stage. The ban list would also be updated here on September 1st, and a massive set of changes would come with this particular list. Newly banned were Fishborg Blaster, Mindmaster, Giant Trunade, and Royal Oppression, with both Fishborg and Mindmaster being linked to OTKs, with one clearly being better than the other in that regard, Giant Trunade being a bit too powerful for game pushes, and Royal Oppression being a thorn in the side of the meta for some time. Newly limited were BLS, releasing from the banned section as a massive boon to the meta, Debris Dragon, Formula Synchron, Shien, Lone Fire Blossom, Hyper Librarian, Trishula, Heavy Storm, Pot of Avarice, Primal Seed, and Sheen Smoke Signal, being a large culling wave for many of the synchro spam strategies in the format. Newly semi-limited were Deloran, yet again, Necrogardna, Summoner Monk, Tragodia, Destiny Draw, Swords of Revealing Light, Call of the Haunted, and Mind Crush. Lastly, unbanned here was Judgment Dragon, Spirit Reaper, Megamorph, MST, Overload Fusion, Gravity Bind, and Icarus Attack, being a large cleanup wave. This ban list was a massive kneecap to the various synchro spamming strategies of the last format, limiting the copies of Formula, Librarian, and Trishula, making them far less potent. But BLS specifically coming to limited here would be an extremely interesting move, as with various decks already playing light pieces alongside Tour Guide, BLS was just effectively a free boss monster in the format. This would lay the groundwork for what is now known as Tengu Plant format, with YCS Ecuador being the first testing grounds of the new meta, being held just over 2 weeks later on September 17th. And though we don't know a lot about this event, we do know that BLS specifically would find its way into 3 of the top 4 decks, including the winning TG agent list by Gallo Orbea, who mixed the recursive bodies of the TG monsters with agents to both make quick synchro pushes but also set up Christia and Hyperion follow-ups. YCS Toronto would happen the same day, and it would paint a clear picture that Synchro Plant had not been slowed down at all by the new ban list, with Agent seeing a massive surge in popularity with the unban of BLS. Doppel Synchron would see a top spot here following its World Championship performance, with Junk and Doppel both providing dark names engraved for Chaos Sorcerer and BLS pushes on top of their synchro lines. Nordic would see a single top spot here, sporting the Nordic Beast line specifically, able to access level 7s and 10s easily on top of providing light names for BLS, which if it wasn't clear yet was the big focus of this particular event. BLS was everywhere. Karakuri would see 2 tops here thanks to Komachi providing extra swarming to the strategy, being searchable with Gen X Neutron 2 for added synergies, but also being one of the first decks in the format to utilize Fiendish Chain, which was quickly becoming more and more popular moving deeper into the Zexal era. As previously mentioned, Agents had adapted their list to make room for more darks to enable BLS lines, specifically in Tour Guide, who enabled rank 3 lines for the strategy, with Leviair being particularly useful to recur an agent you banished to summon Hyperion. Billy Break would take the event with Synchro Plant, similarly adding in Tour Guide to the deck to enable rank 3 lines as well as BLS access. Lastly for this massive block of updates would be the Generation 4 Special Edition, which notably reprinted Absolute Zero for EU access, which in a way would set the stage for the following set to reprint more cards of the GX era to the masses. Legendary Collection 2, The Duel Academy Years. Release date, October 4th, 2011. Set type, reprint set. Major strategies, the various strategies of GX characters. Impact, many reprints, many impactful. Legendary Collection 2 was the second Legendary Collection set, with the first being released the year prior, but literally just being a rerun of 6 DM era sets, it was not really worth covering at the time. This time, however, rather than just doing a rerun of GX era sets, the Duel Academy Years did something revolutionary by building its own massive mega pack, in which various cards used by various GX characters between the anime and manga, as well as a few reprints for cards not specifically used by characters, were included, being one of the largest sets ever released at the time, coming in just behind Dark Revelation 1 by 6 cards. These cards included Jaden's reprints, being Card Trooper, Neospatian Grand Mole, Elemental Hero Stratos, Ocean, Neosalius, Prisma, Necrogardna, Gallus the Star Beast, Dandelion, Miracle Fusion, Emergency Call, Instant Fusion, Super Poly, Hero Blast, and Thunder King Ryo. Aster's reprints, being Destiny Hero Diamond Dude, Malicious, Disc Commander, and Destiny Draw. Zane's reprints, being Cyber Dragon, Cyber Valley, Chimera Tech Overdragon, Overload Fusion, and Future Fusion. Chaz's reprints, being Dark End Dragon and Light End Dragon. No, there is absolutely no time. Bastion's reprints, being Hydrogeddon and Mizuki, and other various reprints, being Phantom of Chaos, System Down, Dimensional Fissure, Macrocosmos, Dimensional Prison, DD Survivor, Banisher of the Radiance, Grandmaster of the Six Samurai, Gateway of the Six, Double-Edged Sword Technique, DD Crow, Gladiator Beast Murmillo, Bestiari, Laquari, Haplomus, Test Tiger, Darius, Equest, Heraclinos, Proving Grounds, and War Chariot, and Lightsworn Jane, Garoth, Lumina, Wolf, Arcus, and Judgment Dragon. Needless to say, this was one of the biggest reprint sets with relevant reprints ever at this particular stage, but with the only relevant change happening here being the release of Gallus the Star Beast to the Americas. However, a change was on the horizon, as the next structure deck would once again introduce a powerhouse to the format, following an unwritten rule of structure decks at this stage that anytime a light structure deck is released, a dark one isn't far behind. Gates of the Underworld. Release date, October 18th, 2011. Set type, Structure Deck. Major strategies, Dark World. Impact, expected powerhouse, massive flop. Gates of the Underworld would be a massive wave of legacy support, once again, this time aimed at the GX era archetype of Dark Worlds, providing them with more tools and an actual endgame boss. These included Snow, who searched a Dark World card when discarded, Ceruli, who summoned itself to the opponent's field when discarded, making you discard another card, which triggers the secondary effect of Dark World monsters. Gates of Dark World, a field spell that can banish a fiend from grave to discard a fiend and draw a card once per turn, and Grapha, who pops a card when discarded and can bounce a Dark World on field to hand to special summon itself from grave. This wave would bring Dark World into the public mindset in a major way, making it one of the most popular decks on release both due to its power and its affordability, as the structure reprinted almost everything you'd need for the deck outside of Tour Guide. This popularity would, in turn, completely ruin the deck's viability for two major reasons, those being the sideboard hate for it and various forms of anti-dark cards being easy to side, in addition to the mirror match being absolutely atrocious, as your reciprocal discard tools will trigger the second effect of any of your opponent's Dark World monsters, leaving the deck in an odd position in the meta at large. Reprints here included Brow, Beige, Silva, Gold, Tragodia, Sangan, Battle Fader, Dealings, Allure, Card Destruction, Terraforming, Deck Dev, Eradicator, Mind Crush, Escape from the Dark Dimension, and Dark Bribe, which was an exceedingly generous reprint pool for the strategy. YCS Columbus would take place 4 days later, and with it, Dark World would fail to clear into the top 32. Though granted, because of our limited coverage of events from this period, we only know 18 of the top 32 decks, as Konami's coverage was a good bit lacking at the time, labeling any deck that aimed to Synchro Summon as Synchro Summon for their deck type. For the strategies we do at least know, Monster Mash was an offshoot of TG Agents in this regard, a strategy that aimed to summon Gallus the Star Beast with its effect to bounce it back with Gen X Ally Birdman to do it again. This would be a different deck from the eventual Gallus FTK that was discovered, simply using Gallus as an extension piece for now, but weirdly still played spells rather than being all monsters, which kind of defeats the purpose of the Monster Mash deck itself. Billy Brake would win this event too with Synchro Plant, just like he had in Toronto the month prior, marking himself as one of the players to follow for the upcoming formats. Following this was the second wave of the Collectible Tins 2011, bringing more reprints in the promo slots with Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo, Guardian Yados, Malefic Stardust Dragon, Solemn Warning, Aaron, Lightsworn Monk, and XX Saber Dark Soul, with Warning being of great value reprint, Malefic Stardust now being legal for the EU, and Dark Soul getting a printing with problem-solving card text, which in turn clarified its effect as only activating once in a turn, finally putting the issue to bed. This would lead into the last core set of the year, and while massive changes were in store from it, I don't think people were quite expecting what was going to be the breakout hit from it. Photon Shockwave. Release date November 15th, 2011. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Photon, Evol, Wind Up. Impact a fluffy little menace on the format. Photon Shockwave was the final core set of 2011 and the second core set of the Zexal era, and as such, many expected a major boost to generic Exceeds to truly get the ball rolling for the era. Instead, Photon Shockwave focused on a couple of key archetypes here to start up new strategies for the era instead, isolating their power plays to the archetypes themselves. The first of these was Photon, a series of monsters focused on summoning 2,000 attack monsters to quickly summon Galaxy Eye's Photon Dragon, a boss that can special summon itself from hand by tributing 2 monsters with 2,000 or more attack, able to banish itself and the opponent's monster it battles until the end of the battle phase, then gaining attack if the monster was an Exceed and the effect attached it to materials. In Archetype, they gain tools like Photon Lead, which special summons a light monster from hand, and Photon Saber Tiger, a TCG exclusive that, when summoned, searched another copy, dropping its attack by 800 if it's the only Saber Tiger on field. Photon would do absolutely nothing from here, leaving Galaxy Eyes a bit stranded for the time being. Evol was a new archetype of reptiles, dinosaurs, and dragons, having the reptiles evolve into the dinosaurs with their effects, and the dinosaurs evolve into the dragon Exceeds by overlaying them with each other. Bringing Evotile Westlow, who summons an Evilsar from deck on flip, Evilsar Serato, who boosts its attack and can search an Evotile when it destroys a monster in battle, if it was summoned by an Evotile effect, Evolzar Logia, a Dino-locked rank 4 that can detach 2 materials to negate a spell, trap, or inherent summon, destroying it, and Evolzar Dolka, a TCG exclusive Dino-locked rank 4 that can detach 1 material to negate a monster effect, destroying it. Evol as an archetype would completely flop on release here, but Logia and Dolka would see play outside of it with another card in this set, which we'll talk about soon. Windup received its second wave of support here in Hunter, who could tribute another Windup to rip a card from the opponent's hand, Kitten, who could bounce a monster, and Rabbit, a TCG exclusive who could banish a Windup until your next standby phase on a quick effect, and Zenmaines, a rank 3 that could prevent its own destruction by detaching a material, destroying a card on field in the end phase if this effect was used that turn. Windup was clearly headed in the right direction to be useful, but was still missing that key piece, although Zenmaines would almost instantly become staple in extra decks thanks to Tour Guide from the Underworld summoning it easily. Moving into the one-offs, Kage Tokage could special summon itself from hand if you normal summoned a level 4, being useful as a rank 4 enabler. Wat Cobra could attack directly and, when it dealt battle damage, searched a Wat monster, seeing play in various stun and burn decks as a chip down option that searched more of itself. Prior of the Ice Barrier could special summon itself if you controlled an Ice Barrier monster, able to tribute itself to summon one from grave, but you couldn't summon a level 5 or higher the turn you special summoned him by this effect, being played in the previously mentioned Wetlands beatdown as an extension piece in Grave Revival for Dewdark. Number 20 Giga Brilliant was a rank 3 that, by detaching a material once per turn, could boost the attack of all monsters you control by 300, being another solid rank 3 target for Tour Guide. One Day of Peace could let both players draw a card and stopped all damage to both players until the end of the opponent's next turn, being extremely powerful for stun and burn decks, both drawing you deeper and preventing losing the following turn. Dark Smog was a TCG exclusive that, by discarding a Fiend, banished a monster from the opponent's grave, clearly intended to be used with Dark Worlds, seeing play as a one-of in some builds for added discard options on the opponent's turn. Lastly, and easily the most important card of the entire set, Rescue Rabbit could, by banishing itself from field, special summon 2 level 4 or lower normal monsters from the deck with the same name. While it wasn't clear immediately, Rabbit was about to grow and rule the format thanks to a couple of Exceeds released here, which would be made clear with YCS Kansas City 4 days later. This event would be another powerful showing from Synchroplant, but could also be considered one of the last big showings, as creeping up right behind it was the new king of the format. Dino Rabbit was the first true Exceed strategy to see mainstream success, focused on the use of Rescue Rabbit to summon out 2 copies of either Cabazals or Sabersaurs from the deck, using them to immediately overlay for either Evolzar Logia or Dolka depending on the needs of the time. In addition to this, Tour Guide was far more powerful here thanks to its ability to summon Levier the Sea Dragon, who could resummon the rabbit to simply do it again. What made this deck in particular a massive thorn in the sides of players of the era was the fact that under priority, you could banish the rabbit before the opponent gets a chance to respond, meaning the primary counter to the card, Effect Veiler, was a completely moot point as you'd never have the opportunity to Veiler the rabbit before it went off. This issue would remain present in the format until early 2012 when Ignition Effect priority was finally removed from the game, but until then, Rabbit going first had next to no true counters. Dark World would see some success here with 3 spots in the top 32, but almost completely fell out by the top 16, with only one player clearing with the deck, suffering from extremely targeted sideboard hate in other decks. Herald Agent would see an interesting inclusion in their top 32 appearance here, being Jhin, Releaser of Rituals, who, if used to make Herald a perfection, locked the opponent out of special summoning, which would be a strategy that comes up again in later formats. Courtney Waller would win the event on Chaos Control, seeing a large power boost from BLS, but notably playing Dimensional Alchemist in the deck to recur pieces banished by your Chaos bosses. Shortly hereafter, Kansas City was the final jump subscription bonus of the year, being Shooting Quasar Dragon, a level 12 3 material Excel Synchro who can attack up to the number of materials used that were not tuners, having an Omni Negate effect and summons Shooting Star Dragon from the extra deck when it left the field. Quasar would be one of the first big bosses ever to have a free Omni Negate built into its effect, a novelty so powerful at the time that the new synchro strategy known as Quasar Turbo would begin to pop up, entirely focused on summoning out Quasar as fast as possible to control the game, which was also shockingly easy thanks to Hyper Librarian and Formula Synchron letting you draw more cards as you climbed, providing 2 of the 3 materials needed for Quasar themselves. There was one more set this year to round things out, and though it wouldn't bring much of anything meta-wise for now, it would set the stage for the following year to shake things up. Hidden Arsenal 5 Steel Swarm Invasion. Release date December 6th, 2011. Set type Deck Building Set. Major strategies the Dual Terminal 2nd Generation Wave 1. Impact Introductions for Impact later. Hidden Arsenal 5 was the final set of 2011, and the first set of the new generation of dual terminal archetypes. But extremely notably, almost none of these archetypes were good in the slightest off of this initial wave, so we're gonna try and keep it moving semi-fast through these. Gem Knight was the new series of Earths that used their vanilla monsters to fuse into bosses, but none of these fusions would be relevant at all. Laval was a series of fire monsters aimed at flooding the graveyard for their effects, but all of them were lackluster for this period of time. Vylon was a series of light fairies that aimed to cycle through equip spells and their bosses, with the only one of note here being Cube for later degenerate FTK strategies. Gusto was a series of wind monsters that specialed another from deck when destroyed in battle, forming a loop known as the Recruiter Loop, which was experimented with for some time for stall strategies in the era, but never saw a major meta success. Steel Swarm was a series of dark monsters aimed at providing tribute materials for their boss monsters, but were so slow in their control game that they saw no play outside of their generic Exceed that had previously released. Lastly, and easily the most noteworthy, Gishki were a series of water monsters focused around ritual summoning their bosses and recurring their ritual spell repeatedly, with this wave bringing Abyss, who searched a Gishki on summon, Chain, who adds a ritual monster or spell from the top 3 of your deck to hand on normal summon, Shadow, who could be discarded to search for a ritual spell and could be used as the entire tribute for a water ritual summon, Aqua Mirror, the archetype ritual spell that could be shuffled back into deck to add a Gishki ritual from grave to hand, and the most notable ritual here being Mind August, who shuffles up to 5 cards from any grave into deck on summon. While not meta relevant yet, Gishki in almost any point in history where it's been relevant has been relevant because of loops, and Mind August would be one of those enablers in the upcoming years, which we will eventually cover. YCS Brighton would follow this release 2 weeks later on December 17th, being the last event of the year, and from it we'd see Dino Rabbit rise up quickly into its spot as the top deck of the format with half of the top 16. Chainburn would take a top spot here, being one of the first sightings of the deck in years at this point, notably playing One Day of Peace as a way to stall out a turn and dig that much deeper for more burn tools. Ping Zhao would win the event with Dino Rabbit, notably playing Jurak Guaiba as another way to access the Evolzars, an inclusion that would become staple for the deck moving forward. And with that, 2011 would come to a close, marking the true start of the Zexal era with its first real Exceed deck taking hold, and Exceeds would only grow in power from here, as 2012 would bring some of the most recognizable Exceed strategies to the forefront of player consciousness, slowly changing how the game was played for years to come. Entering 2012, the Zexal era had just begun and was already starting to pick up steam. While Exceed strategies weren't viable out the gate for the era, Photon Shockwave's release had brought the first major Exceed deck into the meta with Dino Rabbit, leading to the first core release of 2012, which would take that initial step and run miles with it to completely change the meta into an Exceed-dominated space. Order of Chaos. Release date, January 20th, 2012. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Inzektor, Windup, Ninja. Impact, the Triangle format rises. Order of Chaos in many ways is the full start of the Exceed dominance on the meta, as while Dino Rabbit may have been the first Exceed deck, Chaos would bring forward two major meta threats into the space to fully spark the Exceed takeover. Starting with the not as impactful archetypes, Photon would receive a couple of new notable pieces in Lizard, able to tribute itself to search for a Photon from deck, Crusher, a 2k normal summon that swaps to defense if it attacks, and Thrasher, able to special summon itself from hand if you control no monsters and can't attack if you control another monster. While Photon as a deck was still nothing with this support, Thrasher specifically would find a home in rank 4 centric decks thanks to its swarm capability and its typing as warrior, making it searchable with Rhoda. Ninja received a major wave of support for the Exceed era thanks to the Element Armor Ninjas, providing level modulation, Grandmaster Hanzo, able to search either a ninja or a ninjutsu art card based on how he's summoned, Ibizu, who bounces spells and traps, Upstart Golden, who can trade a trap in hand to special summon a ninja from deck, White Dragon, a TCG exclusive that protects spells and traps from destruction, Blade Armor Ninja, a warrior locked rank 4 that can detach a material to make a ninja attack twice that turn, number 12 Crimson Shadow Armor Ninja, a rank 5 able to detach a material on a quick effect to protect ninjas from destruction that turn, Armor Ninjutsu Art of Alchemy, able to destroy at least one other face-up ninjutsu art card to draw 2, Ninjutsu Art of Super Transformation, able to send a ninja you control and a monster the opponent controls to the grave to special summon a dragon, dinosaur, or sea serpent from deck with a lower level than the total of the monsters sent, and Ninjutsu Art of Duplication, a TCG exclusive able to tribute a ninja to summon ninjas from deck whose total level is less than or equal to the tributed ninja. Ninja from here would become a rogue strategy, but specifically the combination of Hanzo and Super Transformation would be a tech option for various strategies centering around dragons, dinosaurs, and sea serpents for a while after, though not super popular for now. Evol would see a couple of pieces to push the strategy forward in Evo Force, which tributes an evil tile to summon an evil Sar from deck, treating it as summoned by an evil tile effect, and Evotile Najasho, a TCG exclusive that summons an evil Sar from deck when tributed. While Evol would not be meta still, these two would go a long way in making the deck playable at a rogue level by giving the strategy actual swarming tools to use with their Exceeds and archetype. As for the archetypes that would be meta, Inzektor was a series of insect monsters focused around equipping themselves to each other to level modulate and gain other effects, with all of the lower level Inzektors sharing an effect to equip an Inzektor from hand or grave to themselves once per turn, gaining level and potentially attack and defense equal to the equipped monsters usually. With Dragonfly special summoning an Inzektor from deck when a card equipped to it is sent to grave, Centipede searching an Inzektor card when an equipped card is sent to grave, Hornet able to send itself to grave while equipped to pop a card on field, Gigamantis and Gigaweevil, who both can equip themselves from hand to an Inzektor themselves, boosting their original attack to 2400 or defense to 2600 respectively, with both special summoning an Inzektor from grave when sent to grave while equipped, Zecalibur, an equipped spell that boosts the monster by 800 and recurs an Inzektor card when sent to the grave from the field, and Hopper, a TCG exclusive that can send itself to grave while equipped to let the previously equipped monster attack directly that turn, but it's the only monster that can attack that turn. Inzektor would very quickly become meta off the back of the interactions of Dragonfly, Centipede, and Hornet, with your standard line giving you 2 level 3 monsters, a search for follow-up, and 2 pops, being rather powerful for the current metagame as a board-breaking combo strategy. The other meta powerhouse to come from this would be Windup, who received Rat, able to change itself to defense to revive a Windup from grave, Shark, a TCG exclusive that can special summon itself from hand when a Windup is summoned, able to raise or lower its level once per turn, Carriers and Mighty, a rank 3 able to detach a material to summon a Windup from deck, and Zenbio, an OCG import rank 5 that can detach a material to destroy 2 set cards once per turn. Windup, thanks primarily to Rat, Shark, and Carrier, would quickly rise into the meta as a hand-ripping combo deck thanks primarily to Windup Hunter from Shockwave, able to tribute a monster to hand rip once while on the field. After establishing a Hunter, you can overlay it into Zenbide, who can detach the Hunter to summon a Rat from deck, able to then revive the Hunter, tribute off the Zenbide to rip a card, and overlay with the Rat for another Zenbide just to do it again. This was exceedingly easy to set up too thanks to Windup Magician and Shark, who themselves could standardly set up a full combo and provide an additional rank 4 to work with. Other notable cards from the set include Trance Archfiend, able to discard a Fiend once per turn to boost itself by 500 attack, also able to recur a banished Dark when sent to grave, being an instant slot in for Dark World. Number C39 Utopia Ray, able to overlay itself onto Utopia, being a last-ditch comeback tool for rank 4 decks by boosting itself by 1500 and dropping an opponent's attack by 3000, but only if you had 1000 or less life points. Number 96 Dark Mist, a 3-material rank 2 that can detach a material to permanently steal half the attack of the monster at battles, being slotted in as an option for agents to make with Shine Balls. The Huge Revolution is over, a counter trap comparable to Starlight Road, able to negate a spell or trap that would destroy at least 2 cards on the field, banishing it, seeing some tech play. Tour Bus from the Underworld, a TCG exclusive that shuffles a monster from grave into deck when sent to grave from anywhere, intended to be a summon target for Tour Guide. And MX Saber Invoker, an OCG import rank 3 that can detach a material to summon a level 4 Earth Warrior or Beast Warrior from deck, destroying it in the end phase, being not used now, but eventually becoming a powerful combo enabler. If this was everything, it would already be enough to completely rock the meta to its absolute core, bringing multiple new strategies into the competitive space. But this core set was also complemented by a structure deck released 2 weeks later that would also introduce various new power cards to the meta, although their power would not be realized for a little bit of time after. Dragons Collide. Release date February 3rd, 2012. Set type Structure Deck. Major strategies Chaos Dragon. Impact Breaking a Spell from 2006. Dragons Collide is a bit of an odd structure deck in terms of release, as while it released on February 3rd in the TCG officially, it had a bit of a staggered release in full, along with the various side sets of this particular year, leading it to releasing in the EU and Oceania a full week before the Americas. This resulted in the next YCS we'll be talking about not being able to use the new cards from the set due to legality dates, which is the primary reason for its staggered results. As for the deck itself, Dragons Collide would aim to take the previous Chaos strategy and meld it together with powerful dragons released over the past few years, to form a new deck in Chaos Dragons, which combined the tendencies of both Chaos Brews and Aggro Dragon into a single strategy. This was thanks to their new cards here, Light Pulsar Dragon, who has the standard Chaos summoning condition of banishing a light and dark, but is also able to summon itself from grave by discarding a light and a dark, able to special summon a level 5 or higher Dark Dragon from grave when sent to grave. Dark Flare Dragon, who has the standard Chaos summon condition and can discard a dragon to send a dragon from deck to grave to banish a card in either grave, and Eclipse Wyvern, who banishes a level 7 or higher light or dark dragon from the deck when sent to graveyard, adding it back to hand when the Wyvern is banished. While Dark Flare wasn't used too much, Light Pulsar and Eclipse Wyvern would become the cornerstone of a new strategy of Chaos Dragons thanks primarily to their interactions with Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, who can revive the Light Pulsar, who itself could revive the Red MD. All of this was enabled by the previous spell of Future Fusion, which at this stage was already being abused by Aggro Dragon thanks to its ability to reveal 5-headed dragon to dump 5 dragons from deck to grave, but could now dump Eclipse Wyverns to be banished for a Chaos summon, immediately netting a search, which standardly meant you could get the entire strategy rolling off of a single card. Reprints here included Prime Material Dragon, Red MD, Dad, Chaos Sorcerer, Summoner Monk, Lila, Raiko, Book of Moon, Reasoning, Monster Gate, Charge of the Light Brigade, and Call of the Haunted. YCS Guadalajara would be the first YCS of 2012, taking place on February 4th, and while the faces of the previous meta were still around to varying levels of success, the new Exceed strategies had clearly taken a majority of the top cut, centering the metagame around these 3. Windup would take the highest slice of the 3, but would only clear into the top 8 overall, as the 3 in a weird way formed a sort of rock paper scissors dynamic where standardly Windup beat Rabbit, Rabbit beat Inzektor, and Inzektor beat Windup. Wind Up being able to hand rip the opponent for 3 to 4 cards in the first turn is insanely powerful, especially going into cards that don't operate well in the grave like Rabbit, especially when they have to go into top deck mode with a deck of 6 bricks in their vanillas. However, Inzektor can play out of the grave quite effectively since their monsters can equip pieces from grave, so the standard hand loop is not as effective against the bugs, which is why you'd see many players on Wind Up main decking cards like Fiendish Chain to stop an Inzektor line from starting. You may have also noticed the inclusion of Maxx C into the main deck here. This is about the point where Maxx C started to see more stable usage, as one of the 3 decks in the meta special summoned like crazy, being Wind Up. So being able to effectively counter the hand loop on turn 1 was a viable tool in this metagame. Inzektor would make it a little farther than Wind Up here, making it to the top 4, and similarly it had interesting dynamics with the other 2 decks in the meta. Seeing as how many cards in their deck could facilitate the board-breaking combo Inzektor is known for, Wind Up is not nearly as potent of an issue when playing into it. However, Dino Rabbit still poses a threat as Inzektor has a difficult time playing into monster effect negation going second, which led to more monster removal in the main to out Dolka. Last of the big 3, Rabbit made it all the way to second place here, facing an Inzektor matchup in the top 4, notably main decking DD Crow here as a way to counter out the Hunter loop by banishing the 1 copy of Hunter out of the grave after the first Zen Mighty summon, as well as being able to counter out Inzektor by banishing their Hornet out of the grave. Aside from this, not much had changed in the deck structure since the previous outing. However, none of the big 3 would take this event, with that honor going to Oscar Zavala on 6 Samurai, similarly main decking Maxx C at 3 copies to help manage the field of the big 3. YCS Atlanta would be held 2 weeks later, and in that period of time it had become fairly clear that Dino Rabbit was probably the pick moving forward, as the other 2 had clear counters going first in different hand traps, while Rabbit still had nothing really stopping it going first due to ignition effect priority. Evol would see its first top here thanks to Najasho and Evo Force from Order of Chaos, giving the deck some actual swarming potential between the 2 reliably accessing the rank 4 pool. Empty Jar would see a single top 16 finish, as the deck had received multiple tools for triggering the jars and stall tools like One Day over the last year. Marquise Henderson would win the day on TG Stun, being a shocking upset in the top 8 of almost entirely Rabbit and Wind Up, showcasing the power of specifically Thunder King Ryo in the meta of extra deck bosses. This event would lead us into the next reprint set 3 days later, and though it had been done before, this set was still hotly anticipated for what it represented for the future of the game. Raw Yellow Mega Pack. Release date, February 21st, 2012. Set type, reprint set. Major strategies, Hero, 6 Samurai, Macro. Impact, double dipping the reprint train. Raw Yellow Mega Pack is an odd case when it comes to reprint sets in the game's history, as it effectively was a compacted version of the previous year's Legendary Collection 2 for individual pack sales. Regardless, Raw Yellow did another big wave of reprints for various strategies and different rarities than before, reprinting Card Trooper, Grand Mole, Stratos, Necrogardna, Neosalius, Gallus, Miracle Fusion, Super Poly, Instant Fusion, Hero Blast, Malicious, Plasma, Sidra, Future Fusion, Mizuki, Ryo, D-Fissure, Macro, D-Prison, DD Survivor, Grandmaster of the 6 Samurai, DD Crow, Gateway of the 6, and Double-Edged Sword Technique. YCS Leipzig would take place 4 days later, and if there was an event to encapsulate how this format felt for the majority of the player base, this was the one, seeing only the Triangle 3 decks make the top 16, with Steven Sluis taking the event with Dino Rabbit, once again showcasing its dominance of the 3. Shortly after Leipzig, the ban list would be updated on March 1st, and while it did handle a couple of sore points in the metagame, it may have also been one of the most out-of-touch ban lists to date, as literally nothing from the current big 3 would get hit in any regard. Newly banned were Glow Up Bulb, Spore, Trishula, and Trap Dust Shoot, which effectively took Synchroplant out behind the barn and also banned probably the most annoying staple in the current meta. Newly limited were TG Striker and Agent Earth, being hits towards TG Agent, I guess? It's a really weird hit set regardless. Newly semi-limited were Lumina, Marshmallow, Reborn Tengu, E-Telly, Level Limit Area B, Sheen Smoke Signal, Torrential Tribute, and Ultimate Offering, being a wide set of hits and releases for decks of the previous metagame. Lastly, Unlimited was Call the Haunted, wrapping a ban list that effectively just primed the meta to be even more reliant on the already powerful Triangle meta. This would be the precursor to the largest event in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, even to this day, being YCS Long Beach on March 24th, with a record of 4,364 players in attendance, sparked by this being advertised as the 100th YCS, when in reality it was the 25th, but it was the 100th major event circuit tournament following the 75 SJCs that happened in the GX and 5Ds eras. While the event did have a top cut of 64 players, records from this period in Yu-Gi-Oh's history are extremely notably incomplete for most events, with some not even having published deck lists period. So in most cases moving forward here, we'll be showing the top cut graphs that are representative of the meta rather than everything, as Long Beach is probably the best example of an incomplete dataset for the entire year, with 39 of the top 64 being unknowns. Looking instead at the top 16, a lot of what we've seen from the past few events held even through the banned list, with Dino Rabbit continuing to see the most success of the big three. Wind Up Beast would be a combination of stun decks in many respects with the Wind Up deck, thanks primarily to Photon Saber Tiger, who combined nicely with Horn of the Phantom Beast to get quick battle wins and damage in while also being a level 3 for Exceed plays into the Wind Up line. Piper Chaos is an odd deck that makes its first appearance in top 4 here, being primarily based on the previously discussed interaction between Mystic Piper and Kinkabiyu, mixing in level 1 powerhouses like Thaler, DD Crow, and Mechlord Emperor Wiesel, who provided synchro countering and spell negation, as well as the Chaos bosses of Sorcerer and BLS. Hero Beat also cleared into the top 4 here, primarily being the same game plan as before, but now with added access to Blade Armor Ninja for quick and sudden OTK pushes, a trend that would be taken to its natural conclusion shortly hereafter. In a massive upset, Michael Ballin would take the event with Dark World, notably adding in Malefic Stardust as a way to keep gates up for multiple turns and Tour Guide providing access to Brawn for either rank 3 plays, or to bounce and resummon Grapha. YCS Lima would follow a week later, and it would be far more standard to the expectations of the meta than how higher placements of Long Beach showed, with the big three taking 14 of the top 16, including the first place slot piloted by Hector DeGaldo, playing Dino Rabbit. Lastly in this block was the Shonen Jump promo for April 2012, which is also pretty important due to the fact that later this year, Shonen Jump was going fully digital, meaning that the promos they had tied to the service would instead now be mailed out directly rather than by the issue. While this doesn't sound like that big of a deal on paper, it meant that now, rather than waiting to see if the promo was worth it and then buying the issue from your local bookstore, it meant that you actually had to be subscribed to Shonen Jump in advance to get the promo, and once the distribution had ended, that was it. You couldn't go and buy more copies of the magazine to get more, you only got what was distributed. With that said, the final print promo for Shonen Jump was number 30 Acid Golem, which was technically already in players' hands prior to the April 1st drop date thanks to it showing up in some deck lists as far back as Long Beach. Being a rank 3 with 3000 attack that locks special summoning of the owner, had to detach a material each turn or burn the user, and couldn't attack if it had no materials. At this time, it would be primarily slotted in decks with reliable rank 3 access, which at this stage was practically every deck thanks to Tour Guide, thanks to it being a large attacking body that was easy to summon. This would lead into the year's starter deck 2 weeks later, and while most starter decks at this stage were hit or miss, this one would bring a couple of new tools to the pool to spice things up nicely. Exceed Symphony. Release date, April 13th, 2012. Set type, starter deck. Major strategies, Jin. Impact, a few new staple Exceeds to the pool. Exceed Symphony would join the pool of the various 5D starter decks in that it introduced a couple of cards that would worm their way into strategies throughout the rest of the year. And it would be thanks to the Jin monsters, a series of Exceeds that each have their own control-centric effects, with Mystroke protecting itself and able to flip a monster face down by detaching material, Mellow Melody able to make a Jin attack twice, Musa-Rhythm who could double an attacking Jin's attack, and Tempo who could detach materials from an opponent's Exceed. While some of these would be more valuable than others, the Jins became popular extra deck staples for a period after, specifically with Mystroke, though each had a period of playability at different points in the game's history. Reprints here included Sangan, MST, Rhoda, and Utopia, being a light reprint wave in line with starter deck expectations. YCS Toulouse would take place the next day, and while many of the faces were the same as the previous outings, there were two decks that were creeping into the public mindset from this event specifically. The first of these was a new iteration of Hero Beat, now referred to as Bubble Beat, which trimmed the monster line down to Stratos, the 3 Alias, and the new inclusion of 3 Bubble Man, whose special summon from hand effect effectively gave an additional body to Exceed summon with, providing an incredibly useful tool thanks to Blade Armor Ninja's previous release, pushing 4400 damage off of a single Exceed summon that also set up the grave for a Miracle Fusion push. The deck didn't suffer in terms of consistency either thanks to E-Emergency Call filling the newly vacated monster slots, being a monster that effectively could be set in the back row to allow for Bubble Man to summon itself, then you'd flip it to search after the fact, which could itself search a Bubble Man for additional summons. The other big hit of a deck would be Chaos Dragons, taking the event piloted by Peter Gross, maxing out every Chaos piece it possibly could alongside the new Dragon Core, though extremely notably chose not to play Future Fusion yet, as that discovery hadn't quite come into the public eye here. Instead, that discovery would happen at YCS Dallas held the same day, where Chaos Dragons similarly climbed the ranks to 2nd place, showcasing the Twilight engine far more than before, but would primarily be centered around Future Fusion, able to set up the deck's primary plays off the back of the 1 card. Nazar Sahan would take the event on Dino Rabbit, notably playing triple of both Maxi and Valor to counter Windup and Inzektor respectively. This, however, was also about to be a sufficient counter to Dino Rabbit as well, as 11 days later on April 25th, the TCG rules were updated, removing Ignition Effect priority from the game, matching the changes made earlier in the year to the OCG. This meant that now, turn player could not activate an Ignition Effect in response to the successful summon of a monster, which would primarily affect decks playing cards like Dad, Chaos Sorcerer, and most of all, Rescue Rabbit, allowing a window to respond to the summon first. This meant that going first, Dino Rabbit now had a counter, being Effect Veiler being used to snipe the rabbit before it could banish and use its effect, which would move to affect the deck's effectiveness compared to the other big 3 members, but even that status was about to be shaken. YCS Chicago took place just 3 days after the priority rule change, and with it we'd see a shocking upset as Chaos Dragon rocketed to the top of the meta briefly here, giving a challenge for the spot of top deck in the meta. The deck had mostly shifted composition back towards the first showing, only with the Future Fusion inclusion, which was continuing to prove to be a massive advantage swing card. Aaron Noel would take the event on Dino Rabbit, showing the deck still had legs despite the new counters being available in the meta. With this shakeup, Ice turned to the next core set releasing 2 weeks later, and while its contributions may seem light on the surface, a shift in player mindset was just on the horizon. Galactic Overlord. Release date May 8th, 2012. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Hieratic, Inzektor, Light Ray. Impact one-off pieces that shift the meta. Galactic Overlord would be the 2nd core set of the year, and it would take a swing for the fences with one new archetype in particular. That archetype was Hieratic, a series of high-level dragons that special summon a normal dragon from hand, deck, or grave when tributed, setting its attack to 0. These included Eset, who could be normaled without tributing and copy the level of a normal dragon onto all Hieratic monsters, Nepthet, who could special summon itself from hand by tributing a Hieratic monster, able to tribute a Hieratic from hand or field to pop an opponent's monster, Su, who had the same summon and pop effect but for spells and traps, Tefnuit, who could special summon itself if you controlled no monsters, Atum, a Dragonlock rank 6 that could detach a material to summon a dragon from deck once per turn, dropping its attack and defense to 0, Heliopolis, a rank 8 that can detach a material to tribute any number of other monsters from field or hand to pop that many cards on field, Seal of Convocation, a search spell for the archetype, and Reflection, an Omni-Negate counter trap whose cost is tributing a Hieratic monster. Hieratic as its own deck would be hit or miss, primarily due to requiring one of the monsters that's able to be summoned without a tribute to start, causing the deck to be prone to bricking if played pure. However, Atum specifically would be pulled from this archetype and splashed into Chaos Dragons thanks to Light Pulsar being a level 6, granting the deck easy access to Red MD from the deck by dropping its attack and defense to 0. Inzektor would see a couple of new pieces here in Ladybug, who could send itself to grave while equipped to raise an Inzektor's level by up to 2, and Exostack, an insect-locked rank 5 that could detach a material to equip an opponent's monster from field or grave to itself, stealing half of its attack and defense. While not much on the surface, Ladybug specifically solved a massive issue with Inzektor's, a going first equipable monster. By using the level modulation effect, it was easy to trigger the Dragonfly and Centipede loops, which could also help to facilitate a new form of deck, being the Inzektor combo deck. Light Ray was the other big debut archetype here, being retrains of famous bosses in the game's history with similar summoning conditions to the dark counterparts from Phantom Darkness years prior. However, none of these would come anywhere near the power and popularity of Dad, flopping on release. Moving on to the one-off cards, Card D was a monster that traded the battle phase of your turn and normal summon to draw 2 cards and end your turn, a popular choice for alternative win condition decks. Photon Strike Bouncer was a rank 6 that could detach a material to negate the effect of a monster on field and burn the opponent for 1000, being one of the first big generic rank 6s. Photon Papilloperative was a rank 4 that could detach a material to swap a defense monster to attack mode, dropping that monster's attack by 600, a solid option in the rank 4 toolbox. Number 25 Force Focus was another generic rank 6 that could negate a level 5 or higher monster's effects for the full turn, having a more niche usage than Bouncer, but handling some corner cases that the former couldn't. Gaia Dragon the Thunder Charger was a rank 7 that could overlay onto any rank 6 or 7, dealing piercing damage, primarily used to override a monster's inability to attack after using an effect, like a tomb. Night Beam
Don't make fun of Night Beam anymore!
Was a new spell trap removal for set cards that stopped the targeted card from activating in response, filling a niche alongside the reliable MST. Lastly, number 11 Big Eye was an OCG import rank 7 that could detach a material to steal an opponent's monster once per turn. Not seeing play for now, but being the first big generic rank 7. YCS Philadelphia would take place a little over a week later, and while the meta appeared mostly unchanged on the surface, a key development had taken hold. The first of these was the appearance of Final Countdown in the top 16. While the deck itself would not stick around in the meta long term, it would set a precedent that would be iterated upon multiple times through the remainder of the year. That being that alt WinCon tools had finally hit a critical mass thanks to cards like Card D and One Day of Peace, resulting in these decks standardly being able to take one game after a long period of time, siding into stall tools like Golden Ladybug for going into time to take games in a seemingly unfair manner. Feng Shen would take the event on Chaos Dragons, seemingly changing very little with Galactic Overlord's release. The set wouldn't be able to sit for long as the new face in town, as 5 days after Philadelphia, a new first-of-its-kind pack would be released, and it would usher in a new direction Konami would be attempting to take Yu-Gi-Oh! In for the foreseeable future. Battle Pack Epic Dawn. Release date, May 24th, 2012. Set type, Draft Pack. Major strategies, various powerful standalone cards. Impact, the first foray into drafts. Epic Dawn would be a bold step for the game in terms of direction, being the first ever pack specifically built to be drafted for sealed play. This was different from all packs that came before it. As anyone who's ever played in a sneak peek event can attest, Yu-Gi-Oh's packs are not conducive to a sealed play environment in the slightest. While this was a revolutionary step, this did mean that for the most part, the pack held nothing new to bring to the table. Only reprints of a couple of noteworthy cards like Gorz, Tragodia, Adrius, Forbidden Chalice and Lance, Fiendish Chain, Zephyros, and easily the most noteworthy, Tour Guide, being her first reprint, but not exactly easy access due to the set size. Far more impactful was the weekly Shonen Jump Alpha promo that was mailed out around this time, whose legalization date was a week later on May 30th, being number 16 Shockmaster, a 3-material rank 4 that could, by detaching a material, lock the activation of spells, traps, or monster effects until the end of the opponent's next turn. This was unquestionably and insanely powerful, recognized immediately as a threat, and would find its way into any strategy with reliable access to a rank 4 line, specifically in the case of windups, as they already had the most reliable way into multiple level 4s to use thanks to Magician, but wouldn't be played for some time after release due to the windup loop still being the most reliably powerful version of the deck. The European WCQ would follow this a week later, and for the most part, the meta was what was expected, with the big 3 in Chaos Dragon taking the majority of representation. Watts would see a top here, primarily building itself as a stun and chip down deck, with Watt Hopper providing access to the Watt Lock and everything else being either a stall tool or direct attack chip damage to win the game slowly. Notably, Card D makes an appearance yet again as a stall strategy tool, which would only grow from here. Stefano Mamoli would take the event with Wind Up, integrating a couple of the newer Jin Exceeds into his lineups, but aside from that being fairly standard. This event would kick off the WCQ circuit for the year, which would pick up quickly, but would first be interrupted by this year's swing at the yearly reprint set with a fun new twist. Gold Series Haunted Mine. Release date June 7th, 2012. Set type reprint set. Major strategies, staples of the last year. Impact, a unique rarity, only of its kind. Haunted Mine is an interesting experiment in the long line of Gold Series packs, as it was to this day the only time we've seen the unique rarity of Ghost Gold rares, being reserved for the one card of each super type with the exception of Exceeds, being interesting in their selections. The cards printed in Ghost Gold here included Blue Eyes, Gores, Herald of Perfection, Naturia Barkion, MST, and Solemn Judgment, with some being staples but other being downright odd compared to what could have taken their slot, specifically in the case of Barkion. Other notable reprints from this year's Gold Series were Fabled Grimro, Master Hyperion, Grapha, Bryonic, Naturia Beast, Formula Synchron, Beredo, Utopia, Dark Hole, and Starlight Road, being more meta-relevant than last year's, but still being a bit light on the reprints expected of it. The Oceania WCQ would take place a week later on June 14th, and a point of note, the coverage of these events is almost non-existent outside of Konami's official coverage, which was not done for this particular event. So while we do have records of winners and some top-cut compositions, we do not have deck lists for many of these. Oliver Parle would win the event on Chaos Dragon, being a fairly standard build for the deck at this stage, but aside from that, we know literally nothing about this particular WCQ. The Central America WCQ would be held the same weekend, and while we know the top cut composition, we once again are missing most deck lists for this event. Alvaro Gonzalez would take the event with Six Samurai, interestingly playing a copy of Sheen Squire in the main as a way to provide battle protection for the various Six Samurai pieces, and Zanji to remove specific threats. Ironically, Six Samurai was about to get more support in the next release, but whether that support would be considered good is not really up for debate. Samurai Warlords. Release date June 21st, 2012. Set type Structure Deck. Major strategies Six Samurai. Impact, a single worthless new card. Samurai Warlords is a bit of an anomaly when it comes to structure decks, as it's actually a TCG exclusive structure deck, which became apparent when you realize it only brought a single new card for Six Samurai strategies, being Shadow of the Six Samurai Sheen, a Six Samurai locked rank 4 that could detach a material to make a Six Samurai monster's original attack 2000 until the end of the turn. Why? This is a serious question. Why? Shadow did absolutely nothing for the deck in the slightest, with the structure deck itself being primarily just a series of reprints for Six Samurai, although most of the included cards were either already reprinted in Legendary Collection 2 and Raw Yellow Mega Packs, or were low rarity to begin with. Reprints included Grandmaster, Kizan, Inishi, Kaigeki, Elder, Dark Hole, Rhoda, United, Gateway, Smoke Signal, Dojo, Double-Edged Sword Technique, and Fiendish Chain, being all around unimpactful. The South American WCQ was held the next day, and we'd see a fairly standard spread yet again, with a couple of odd decks breaking into the top 32 like Final Countdown, Machina Gadget, Black Wings, and Herald Agents, but unfortunately we have absolutely no deck lists from this event pulling these strategies from Konami's coverage of the event. Marco Oviedo would win the event with Wind Up, but his list was never made publicly available for us to analyze here. The North American WCQ was held a week later, and Dino Rabbit and Wind Up would effectively edge out the entire competition, with Wind Up taking the event piloted by Tyler Tabman, playing a mostly standard list at this stage, but notably played Instant Fusion for access to both rank 3 and 5 lines to help with consistency. This would be the last WCQ event before Worlds, but between now and then, there were a couple of set releases that would break up the pace of the meta just slightly with a mostly unimpactful set release. Hidden Arsenal 6 Omega Exceed. Release date July 24th, 2012. Set type Deck Building Set. Major strategies Dual Terminal Gen 2 Wave 2. Impact, more useful pieces than last time. Hidden Arsenal 6, while being better than 5 before it, still brought very little to the game as a whole, as 5 was such a low bar that even 2 pieces of generically good support would have done the trick. Out of the 6 archetypes, the only one that didn't receive any playable cards here was Steel Swarm, seeing more subpar Tribute Engine pieces. Laval finally got their play starter they needed in Volcano Handmaiden, who can send a Laval from deck to grave when sent to grave with another Laval already in grave, meaning you can send all copies of Handmaiden to grave off of her effect before binning another Laval. While this seems unimpressive on the surface, Handmaiden has 200 defense, meaning that by doing this you could set up a massive rekindling play for 3 level 1 tuners, finding usage in some Quasar builds. Vylon would receive mostly standard, unimpressive pieces, but they also received Desigma, a 3-material rank 4 that could detach a material to equip an opponent's monsters to itself, gaining a Catastor-like effect when battling monsters of that attribute, seeing some play in rank 4 decks. Gishki would receive Vision, the ritual monster search companion to Shadow, and Gust Kraken, a level 6 ritual that shuffles a card from the opponent's hand into the deck on ritual summon. That second one probably set off some red flags immediately. And yes, a loop was discovered with the monster, but it wouldn't be available for the TCG until 2013, and even then the loop would be hit far prior to it becoming an issue. Gusto would receive a new rank 2 in Phoenix, who could attach a material to make itself able to attack twice that turn, seeing play as a staple rank 2 boss. Lastly, Gem Knight received probably the most basic playable card they could have in Gem Knight Pearl, a rank 4 with 2600 attack and no effect, seeing play as the largest rank 4 body in the game for attacking over threats. A couple of weeks later on August 10th, the first wave of this year's collectible tins would drop, bringing waves of new promo reprints to the masses with reprints of Evolzar Dolka, Gen X Neutron, Scrap Dragon, Wind Up Zenmaines, Wind Up Rabbit, Evolzar Logia, and an early introduction to Heroic Champion Excalibur, the cover card of the next core set due out later that month. That same weekend, the 2012 World Championships would take place, and with the top 8 showcase, a massive shift would appear to have taken place, but clarification is absolutely critical here. With the World Championships, the OCG and TCG card pool has to be consolidated to ensure fairness across the board, meaning any cards that are currently OCG or TCG exclusive are banned for this event. Because of this, Tour Guide from the Underworld was banned for this one event, as it was a TCG exclusive at the time, which put both Wind Up and Dino Rabbit at a severe handicap, as Wind Up lost its easiest rank 3 enabler for the loop startup, and Dino Rabbit lost access to Leviair for bringing back the Rabbit, leaving Inzektor as the only unaffected deck of the big 3. Another extremely interesting sighting here was Exodia, piloted by Jarrell Pro Winston, making it all the way into top 8 of Worlds here thanks to all of the various stall and draw tools from across the years, with Hope for Escape specifically being extremely powerful, as standardly, after you've resolved your upstarts, gift cards, and taken a couple of hits, you could potentially draw 6 to 8 cards off of a resolved Hope, giving the deck an insane amount of burst draw power we hadn't seen before. Saito Akikazu of Japan would take the event with Inzektor, notably not playing the standard 1-of Zecalibur in his list and citing Really Eternal Rest to counter out the mirror match, claiming this year's title of World Champion. This would lead into the next core set releasing 2 weeks later, and it would be a sort of catalyst into player thinking, as the pack's color was green. Return of the Duelist. Release date, August 24th, 2012. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Prophecy, Madolche, Geargia. Impact, a slow burn reboot to the meta. Return of the Duelist would be the arguable start of the green pack equals broken debate, as while it may not have appeared to be on the first release, in retrospect Return would introduce 3 different archetypes that would go on to define the metagame in some shape or form for the next few years. The first of these would be Prophecy, which is technically 2 intertwined archetypes, being Prophecy, a series of spellcasters centered around chaining various spells together for massive effect, and the Spellbooks, a series of spell cards that each provide some kind of benefit to spellcasters. This first wave included Spellbook Magician, the one card that is a member of both archetypes, able to search a Spellbook spell card on normal summon, Temperance, who can tribute itself the turn you use a Spellbook spell to search for a level 5 or higher light or dark spellcaster from deck, High Priestess, able to special summon herself from hand by revealing 3 spellbooks in hand, able to banish one from hand or grave to pop a card on field, Secrets, able to search a spellbook card, which could include Spellbook Magician, Power, able to boost a spellcaster by 1000 attack and search a spellbook if it destroyed a monster in battle that turn. Life, which banishes a spellcaster from grave and reveals a spellbook in hand to revive a spellcaster. Wisdom, which makes a spellcaster immune to either spells or traps that turn, and Crescent, a TCG exclusive that can reveal 3 different spellbooks in deck to have the opponent add 1 at random to your hand, but only if you have no spellbooks in grave. Prophecy would fail to break into the meta initially, but a baseline for a powerful resource loop was present with this first wave, already able to guarantee at least 2 searches thanks to Secrets and Blue Boy. Madolche was a series of earth monsters that all had effects to shuffle themselves back into deck when destroyed, with Mufule summoning another Madolche from hand on normal summon, Mageline searching a Madolche on normal summon, Puddingcess gaining 800 attack and defense while there are no monsters in grave, able to pop a card on field after it battles a monster, and Chateau, a field spell that shuffles all Madolches from grave back into deck on activation, boosts Madolches by 500 attack and defense, and made all Madolches shuffle back effects instead add back to your hand. While promising, Madolche at this stage just poised itself as an infinite conga line of decently powerful monsters, with the hardest part of the deck being that monsters used for Exceed material and then being sent to grave would clog their no monsters in grave game plan, causing the deck to fall flat for now, but the pieces for something were there. Geargia was the last of the 3 new big archetypes, a series of level 3 and 4 earth machines tailored for Exceed spam. These included Accelerator, who could special summon itself from hand if you controlled a Geargia, recurring a Geargia when sent from field to grave, Armor, who searches a Geargia on flip and could flip itself face down once per turn, Arsenal, who contributed itself to special summon a Geargia from deck, and Gear Gigantex, a machine locked rank 4 that could detach a material to search for a level 4 or lower machine once per turn, able to special summon a level 3 or lower Geargia from grave when it leaves the field. Geargia would see the most short-term success of these 3, finding homes in all manner of earth machine strategies like Machina, Gadget, and Karakuri, being a neat fit, especially with their Exceed synergizing with all of these well. On to the one-offs. Atlantean Attack Squad was a slightly too early piece of support for an upcoming release, able to boost itself by 800 attack if you controlled a fish, sea serpent, or aqua monster, instantly becoming the new go-to target for Diva. Grant Soil the Elemental Lord was a new boss for Earth strategies, able to special summon itself if you had exactly 5 Earth monsters in grave, able to revive a monster in either grave on summon, and skip the battle phase of your next turn when it left the field. This card in particular would be a bit of a contentious point as we move into the next few YCSs, which we'll cover soon, where Arfthau could search a level 1 monster from your deck, taking 2000 if you did not normal summon it that turn, being useful as a generic search for a level 1 starter in the future, but for now finding a home in Piper Chaos. Lastly, Soul Drain was a new Skill Drain-esque card that locked the activation of grave and banished effects, seeing side deck play as a counter for various strategies. 3 days later, the next weekly Shonen Jump Alpha promo would be legalized for use, being the final of the 3 Egyptian god cards, Slifer the Sky Dragon, completing the trifecta and being arguably an alternative for decks already teching in a copy of Obelisk, able to snipe any monster with 2000 or less attack that's summoned. 4 days after this, on September 1st, the ban list would be updated yet again to effect a shift in the meta dominated by the same decks for months on end at this point. Newly banned were Bryonic and Future Fusion, with the former being a generic synchro that's been played since release, and the latter being an integral piece of Chaos Dragons, being the piece that pushed the deck over the edge of power that made it so prevalent in the meta. Limits were Chaos Sorcerer and Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, hits to Chaos Dragons, Evagishki Gust Kraken, a preemptive hit to the Loop deck, Inzektor Dragonfly and Hornet, massive hits to the world-winning strategy, Wind-Up Carriers and Mighty, a major hit to the power of the Wind-Up Hand Loop, Ultimate Offering, a hit to the Exceed spam capabilities of Gadgets, and Spore and Tsukiyomi, returning from the banned section. Newly semi-limited were Rescue Rabbit and Tour Guide, both hits to Dino Rabbit, with Tour Guide being a hit to most decks in the meta, A Hero Lives an E-Emergency Call, hits to the Hero Beat variants, specifically Bubble Beat, Hieratic Seal of Convocation, a hit to Hieratic, which seemed odd since the deck had yet to top a major event, Pot of Duality, a hit to the generic Consistency card, and Kalut, Debris Dragon, Agent Earth, Reasoning, and Mirror Force, all returning from Limited. Lastly, unlimited here were Necrogardna, Marshmallow, Destiny Draw, E-Telly, Level Limit Area B, Swords of Revealing Light, and Magic Cylinder, being a wave of cleanup for the ban list. The results from the YCS held the same day would show how these changes affected the meta, being YCS Toronto, and the primary change would be the erasure of both Chaos Dragons and Inzektor from the meta at large, but a few new faces would pop up here to fill the void. The first of these was Machina Geargia, making it all the way to top 4 on its first outing, showcasing the raw power of being able to search your entire deck off of a rank 4, and playing a very defensive back row line to back it up. The second, and probably most controversial of this lineup, was Jeff Jones's Grand Soil Psychics, which made it all the way to second place here, and most historians still have no clue how. The deck is full of easy access emergency teleport lines to access synchro pushes, with Serene Psychic Witch in particular holding a powerful place as a floater that sets up the following turn's main play line safely by banishing the target you're floating into until the next turn. What makes it all more interesting is that every psychic in this list was an earth monster, meaning that the new boss of Grand Soil is fairly simple to set up, with Miracle Synchrofusion providing a late game push into Ultimate Axon Kicker for both raw power and Grave Manipulation for Grand Soil setups. While this deck would top again after this, it was an anomaly that very few truly understand, and it was very much a top from the player, not the deck, baiting so many players that format into playing what was effectively a subpar deck for the metagame. This would be further shown by the winning deck of Windup, piloted by Joshua Graham, who notably adjusted his list following the carrier limit to be instead focused on the new boss of Windups, Shockmaster. As it turns out, Shockmaster was unquestionably the best thing you could be doing this format, as almost every deck folds to calling monster effects in passing, stunning any and all response lines from your opponent, causing Windups to surge in popularity following this outing. Joshua would also be the first recipient of the new YCS prize card, Digvorzok, the King of Heavy Industry, retiring the previous Blood Mephist. YCS Guatemala would be held a week later, and while we'd see more diversity in the top cut here, Windup had comfortably taken its spot on the throne as the top deck here once again. Unfortunately, this is another event where we do not have many deck lists for the top cut, relying on Konami coverage to show what the top cut was even comprised of. Angel Flores would take the tournament here with Hero Beat, notably including Card D into his list and backing off of the Bubble Beat trend with the semi-limiting of the primary hero spells, pivoting back to Gemini Spark builds that came before. YCS Sheffield would be held the same day, but this particular event is weird to discuss compared to literally every other event this year. Instead of entering the tournament with a deck like normal, every player was given 50 random cards from Battle Pack Epic Dawn to build their 30 card decks, meaning that the event was going to come down to deck building and raw player skill. Peter Gross would take the inaugural Draft YCS, setting the bar for future sealed events by beating Rodrigo Tagores, another large name in the scene, in the finals. YCS Indianapolis would take place 2 weeks later, and with it we'd see both Chaos Dragons and Inzektors peek their heads back into the meta with top cut appearances, with Chaos Dragons even taking the third largest portion of the top cut behind Geargia. Going into the list we have access to, Chaos Dragons had pivoted back to using Dark Flare at its maximum 3 copies to provide more reliable chaos pushes, with eliminating a sorcerer in addition to a full reliance on the Lightsworn core of triple Lila, Raikou, Recharge, and 1 Charge of the Light Brigade. Another interesting point of note here is Night Assailant, being an additional fiend target to have in the deck now that Tour Guide was semi-limited, which would be a hotly debated point moving forward. Inzektor would make top 8 here thanks to a pivot back towards the combo style of Inzektor, with Card Trooper able to potentially set up the grave with pieces like Hornet and Ladybug, while upping copies of Zecalibur to recur Dragonfly once it had been used. Hieratic would make it to top 4 here, notably playing not only Card D to facilitate deeper draws to offset the bricks, but also Birdman to facilitate potential synchro plays into Stardust and Scrap Dragon, maxing out copies of Atum and Gaia Dragon to push massive board swarming. Junior Dorson would take the event on Six Samurai, following trends from earlier this year by playing a copy of Zanji as well as a copy of Iroh to handle corner cases, with Blade Armor Ninja and Heroic Champion Excalibur both being solid extra deck inclusions here, to be made with keys-ons that are constantly being spammed out thanks to Gateway. Following this YCS would be another major reprint set just a week later, and it would bring something interesting to the table that would change a couple of deck positions in the upcoming meta with its inclusion. Legendary Collection 3 Yugi's World. Release date September 27th, 2012. Set type reprint set. Major strategies, DM era staples. Impact, 1 new card for stun strategies. Yugi's World was the third and probably most interesting of the Legendary collection so far, as while its reprints weren't really meta relevant, it was a massive boon to the popularity of retro formats by reprinting various DM era staples that were currently banned in high rarity. Reprints here included BLS, The Gadgets, Gores, Dark Hole, Raigeki, Monster Reborn, Pot of Greed, Card Destruction, Heavy Storm, MST, Graceful Charity, Brain Control, Mirror Force, Toon Table of Contents, Sangan, Morphing Jar, Change of Heart, Harpy's Feather Duster, Solemn Judgment, Sinister Serpent, Mirage of Nightmare, Imperial Order, Torrential, Bottomless, the Gravekeeper Core, Dark Grepher, Book of Moon, and Exodia. It did also bring one more new card to the game, which itself is an odd piece of Yu-Gi-Oh! History in and of itself, as it represents a major filler arc in the anime following the end of Battle City. The Seal of Orichalcos could, in exchange for locking special summons from the extra deck and destroying all special summoned monsters on activation, boost your monsters by 500 attack, protect itself from destruction, and prevent your weakest monster from being attacked while you have 2 or more monsters out. While it sounds like a lot of drawbacks for a card with minimal upsides, Orichalcos would find a home in stun strategies, as boosting your floodgate monsters like Fossil Dyna and Ryo proved to be exceedingly useful while also giving a field spell that keeps itself active for your Malefic monsters, negating the need for Malefic Stardust's effect and making Malefic Cyber End more valuable. This wouldn't be the last set release of this block, as 2 weeks later, the next structure deck would release, and while its contents wouldn't be meta warping immediately, it would quickly rise into its position as part of the next mega meta threat. Realm of the Sea Emperor. Release date, October 11th, 2012. Set type, structure deck. Major strategies, Atlantean. Impact, half of the next meta threat. Realm of the Sea Emperor is a bit of an interesting case, as the structure deck would bring the primary wave of support for the archetype of Atlantean, but it wouldn't do much on its own for the time being. The primary pieces here being Dragoons, who search the Sea Serpent if sent to grave to activate a water monster effect, Heavy Infantry, who pops a face-up card if sent, and Marksman, who pops a face-down card if sent. All 3 of these being able to trigger off of being sent to activate a water monster effect would lay the groundwork for an archetype coming in the next core set, but we'll get to that soon enough. Notable reprints here included Deep Sea Diva, Spined Gilman, Snowman Eater, Terraforming, Dark Hole, and Torrential Tribute, being notably lighter compared to previous structure decks. In addition to this, the last weekly Shonen Jump Alpha promo would be legalized here, being Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max, a rank 10 that can detach a material to burn for 2000, being exceptionally powerful, but the one strategy that could reliably make it, Dragons, just had their primary weight into it limited, being Red MD, so for now Gustav Max would be a sidelined card, but would have the occasional pop-up when a level 10 deck needed that last push forward. YCS Providence would take place a week later, and with it we'd see an odd shift in the meta with Agent suddenly resurging in a major way. With Agent Earth being semi-limited on the last banned list, the deck had a more reliable way to access Christia lines yet again, bringing them back in as the best deck in the game to utilize both Christia and Herald of the Orange Light. Monster Mash made another appearance in Top Cut here, once again utilizing Gallus and Birdman to swarm the board, but this time also using new tools like Ghost Ship, Cyber Tannin, and Light Ray Sorcerer to modulate light monster counts in Gray for big power pushes. Lancer Frogs would be a new evolution of the previous Frog Monarch, utilizing Sea Lancer with Ronin Totem to make large power pushes in addition to copies of Obelisk the Tormentor showing up as a frog end boss. Fish OTK saw a bit of reinvention here with Friller Rapka and Shark Stickers being the targets of choice this time, giving access to your rank 3 pool to OTK the opponent with large power pushes like Coelacanth, Giga Brilliant, and Acid Golem. Chaos Zombie would make it all the way to top 4 here, being a bit of a surprise as most of the big pieces for the deck were still hit heavily, but with 3 Call of the Haunted, Grave Revival is an easy thing to accomplish. Chris LeBlanc would win the event with Karakuri Geargia, showcasing Geargia's flexibility to merge itself with any other Earth Machine core, as Accelerator and Birdman can effectively make an entire board of Karakuris thanks to Accelerator summon not being once per turn. Following a week later would be the second wave of the 2012 collectible 10s, bringing yet another reprint promo wave, this time including Ninja Grandmaster Hanzo, Heliopolis, Maxi, Tour Guide, Shockmaster, Rescue Rabbit, and Leviair, notably making Shockmaster legal to play in the EU now. With that said, there was only one set release left for the year, and to say a shakeup was coming would absolutely be an understatement, as its release was about to rock the format to its core. Abyss Rising. Release date, November 9th, 2012. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Mermail, Prophecy, Madolche. Impact, a new watery meta threat. Abyss Rising was the last core set and the last major set in general for 2012, bringing a second wave of support for various decks from Return of the Duelist premieres, while also bringing its own new powerhouse archetype. That archetype was Mermail, a series of fish, aqua, and sea serpents all centering around swarming the field in various ways. This initial wave brought us Abyss Lind, who when destroyed on the field summons a Mermail from deck, Abyss Gund, who revives a Mermail when discarded, Abyss Spike, able to discard a water monster to search a level 3 or lower water from deck, Abyss Megalo, a level 7 that can discard 2 water monsters to summon itself from hand, adding an Abyss spell or trap from deck to hand when summoned this way, and able to tribute a water monster once per turn to make itself able to attack twice, Abyss Gaios, a waterlocked rank 7 that locks level 5 and higher from attacking, and can detach a material to negate the effects of all monsters your opponent controls with less attack than himself, and Abyss Sphere, which summons a Mermail from deck on activation, negating its effects on field, locking spell cards, and destroying itself in the opponent's next end phase. Mermail from here would see an explosive start into the meta, which we'll talk about with the next YCS. Prophecy and Spellbook will receive a solid follow-up wave here in Justice, who can banish herself in the end phase if you activated a Spellbook that turn to search for a level 5 or higher light or dark spellcaster and a Spellbook from deck to hand. Eternity, which adds a banished Spellbook back to hand. Fate, which could banish up to 3 spellbooks engraved to trigger one of its effects, with the most common being the Banish 3 for a non-targeting banish. Grand Spellbook Tower, a field spell that can stack a spellbook from grave on bottom of the deck to draw one in your standby phase, special summoning a spellcaster from deck with level equal to or lower than your spellbooks engraved when destroyed, and Starhall, a TCG exclusive that gained a spell counter every time a spellbook is activated, boosting all spellcasters by 100 for each, and adds a spellcaster from deck to hand with a level less than or equal to the counters it had when it was destroyed by a card effect. Spellbooks once again would not quite be meta from this, but if the direction they were going kept up, it wouldn't be long until the resource engine breaks into the meta, especially with the power of Fate's non-targeting banish effect. Madolche would see a powerful second wave too in Messengelato, who is able to search a Madolche spell or trap when special summoned while you control a beast type Madolche monster. Queen Tiramisu, a Madolche locked rank 4 that can detach a material to target up to 2 Madolche cards engraved, shuffling them back into deck to spin away that many cards the opponent controls, not targeting for the spin back. Ticket, which adds a Madolche monster from deck to hand if you return a Madolche from field or grave to hand or deck, able to special summon the card instead if you control a fairy type Madolche, and Madolche Palooza, able to summon any number of Madolche monsters from hand, shuffling them into deck at the end phase. This wave would be powerful enough to let Madolche see the occasional rogue level success, but something was still missing for the deck to be consistently powerful, as its swarm potential was extremely minimal with the best option there being Mufile. As for the one-offs, Planet Pathfinder could tribute itself to search for a field spell, which while not powerful now would be revisited in the future once field spells became more vital. Solar Windjammer was a level 5 that could be special summoned if you control no monsters, raising its level each turn, being considerable for decks needing a level 5 flood option going first. Molan Glacio, the Elemental Lord, was a counterpart to Granol from the last set, just for waters instead of earths, and ripped 2 cards from the opponent's hand on summon, seeing play for the newly popular Mermails as a boss. Gagaga Cowboy was a rank 4 that gained a different effect based on what battle position it was in, gaining 1000 attack and dropping its attack target by 500 that turn when in attack position, or dealing 800 burn in defense position, which became such a common effect that the term Cowboy for game became a regular occurrence, with players commonly burning their opponent for the last 800 needed to win a game. Forbidden Dress would be another alternative to Lance and Chalice, able to drop a monster's attack by 600 to prevent targeting and effect destruction that turn, seeing occasional play for specific decks in the near future. Abyss Dweller was a new TCG exclusive rank 4 that boosted all water monsters by 500 while it had a water material, and could detach one to prevent any grave effect activations from the opponent that turn, seeing immediate extra deck staple play as a counter to various strategies. Lastly, Bahamut Shark was an OCG import water-locked rank 4 that could summon a rank 3 or lower water Exceed from the extra deck, losing its attack the turn it was activated, seeing play for specific Exceed summons later in this era and into the next. YCS Seattle Tacoma was held just 9 days later, and immediately we'd see Mermail make an impact on the meta, taking 7 of the top 32. Calling the deck solely Mermail does feel like a bit of an injustice, as it's technically 3 major archetypes all smashed together, being Mermail, Atlantean, and Genex weirdly enough. As the Atlanteans all trigger when sent to grave to use a Water Monsters effect, they naturally synergize well with the Mermails, who are constantly sending waters to grave for cost, triggering the searches and pops from the Atlantean side of the deck. In a similar vein, Genex Undyne is notably useful as it sends a water from deck to grave for cost to search for Genex Controller, meaning you have a normal summon that can pitch any Atlantean from deck for its effect. In addition to this, Abyss Sphere specifically holds a lot of power by summoning out Abyss Lind, who gets her summon from deck effect when popped by Sphere leaving the field, giving the deck so many ways into Abyss Megalo. On top of all of this, Molan Glacia is just another powerful body to add to the pile of insane power the deck can put out, but shockingly, Mermail would only get second place here. First place would be instead taken by Michael Stibbins on Inzektor, playing the more refined version of the combo variant here, and notably playing triple Threatening Roar in the main to buy a turn for Card D to do its thing. YCS Barcelona would be the last event of the year, held 3 weeks later, and while we don't know much about this event, we do know that a newer variant of an old favorite would take the day, that being Jack Brune's Macro Rabbit, a variant on the previous Dino Rabbit with the power of Macrocosmos slotted in, which counters all of these primary threats in the meta while not stopping your own cards, which would lead to the deck's popularity growing from here. Lastly for the year, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal Manga Volume 2 promo would drop 2 days after Barcelona, being number 50 Black Ship of Corn, able to detach a material to send an opponent's weaker monster to grave and burn them for 1,000, which would see the occasional tech slot in various rank 4 strategies. And with that, 2012 would come to a close, bringing the Zexal era into a full steam ahead mode as newer and more powerful Exceed strategies continue to pop up and grow moving forward, with one particular mega threat on the horizon, which many players believe is one of the greatest leaps in power in the game's entire history. Exiting 2012, a shift in the meta that had been present for the past year was starting to creep in. Though a majority of the year had been dominated by the triangle format decks, Abyss Rising at the tail end of the year brought a new competitor to the table in Mermail, which appeared to be poised to challenge the long-standing champions of the metagame. This led us into the first set of the year, and if Abyss Rising gave us the water threat we've been needing, the next set would bring the fire to combat it. Cosmo Blazer. Release date, January 25th, 2013. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Noble Knight, Fire Fist, Mermail. Impact, the fire to Mermail's water. Cosmo Blazer would kick the year off with a core set focused on introducing a new fire archetype to the game to help combat the powerful Mermails introduced last set, while also bringing waves of support for previously introduced archetypes to help boost their playability into the metagame. The new archetype was Fire Fist, a series of fire beast warriors centered around their interactions with the Fire Formation series of continuous spells and traps. This first wave gave us Bear, who sets a Fire Formation spell from deck when he deals damage and can send a Fire Formation spell trap to grave to pop a monster on field. Gorilla, who sets a Fire Formation spell from deck when it destroys a monster in battle, able to send a Fire Formation spell trap to grave to pop a spell or trap. Dragon, who sets a Fire Formation trap from deck when a Fire Formation spell trap is activated, and can send 2 Fire Formation spell traps to grave to revive a Fire Fist. Tiger King, a Beast Warrior locked rank 4 that sets a Fire Formation spell trap from deck on summon, can detach to negate all non-Beast Warriors on field until the end of the turn, and when sent to grave can send 3 Fire Formation spell traps to grave to summon 2 lower level Beast Warriors with the same attack from deck. All of the Fire Formation spells and traps share an effect to boost Beast Warriors' attacks by a value while face up, being 100 for spells and 300 for traps, with each having an additional effect, with Tenki searching a lower level Beast Warrior on activation, Tensu giving an additional normal of a Beast Warrior every turn, Tensen boosting a Beast Warrior by 700 that turn on activation, and Tenkin negating a Beast Warrior's effects but making it immune to cards other than itself on activation. We also received a few more pieces in the OCG import slots, being Horse Prince, a level 6 synchro that summons a level 3 fire from deck on synchro summon, Lion Emperor, a fire-locked rank 3 that can detach one to recur a fire from grave to hand, and Spirit, a level 3 tuner that revives a level 3 200 or less defense fire on normal summon. Fire Fist gave a solid introduction wave here, but was clearly being pulled in two different directions, being a rank 4 focus deck between Bear, Gorilla, and Tiger King, and a level 3 strategy with Spirit, Lion Emperor, and Horse Prince. Though notably, even though there were other level 3 Fire Fists in the set, there were currently no in-archetype monsters that Spirit could revive other than another copy of itself. Because of the split in focus, two different versions of Fire Fist would be created, known as 3-axis and 4-axis, named for which level that version focused on, with 4-axis being the only playable version at this stage, heavily relying on Bear to do the heavy lifting of the deck as clearly the best main deck piece. In addition to this, Tenki would move to see play outside of Fire Fist as well due to effectively being a Beast Warrior Rhoda, filling a niche no other card really had filled at that stage, and would continue to see play in any Beast Warrior focused deck for a long period of time after. Moving into archetypes that received new support, Noble Knight is the first TCG exclusive archetype that has technically been around for some time at this stage, seeing roughly 1 to 2 cards per core set release since Galactic Overlord. However, most of their cards seemed completely disjointed from each other thus far. This set would introduce their first decent wave of support to give the strategy an actual direction to move in, so let's talk about it. Noble Knight Madrot is a level 4 light warrior that becomes a level 5 dark warrior while equipped with a Noble Arm spell, and can, if equipped, summon a Noble Knight from deck and pop its equipped spell, which triggers the float effect of the Noble Arm spells. In addition to this, Noble Arm's Calburn boosts the equipped monster by 500, can boost the controller's life points by 500 on a soft once per turn, and when destroyed can re-equip itself to a Noble Knight on a hard once per turn. Lastly, Artorgus, King of the Noble Knights, is a Noble Knight locked rank 4 that, on Exceed Summon, equips up to 3 Noble Arms from grave to himself, and can detach to pop spells and traps on the field up to the number of Noble Arms equipped to himself. Noble Knight at this stage is still far from being considered a meta contender, but this would be the first wave of support for the deck to be considered a good direction for the strategy, being held back by the lack of good Noble Arms spells and the lack of good targets for Madrot Summon at this stage. Mermail would also see a solid second wave of support here in Abyssdine, able to summon herself if searched while you control a Mermail, able to revive a level 3 or lower Mermail if summoned by a Mermail effect, Abyss Lead, able to summon itself from hand by discarding 3 other waters, able to recur an Abyss spell trap engraved to hand on summon, and can rip a card from the opponent's hand by tributing another Mermail, Abyss Trite, a 3 material rank 3 that can detach to change an effect target to itself and revive a Mermail on destruction, and Abystius, a TCG exclusive that can summon itself by discarding another water and searches a Mermail when summoned this way. This wave would fill the in-archetype void in terms of swarming, especially for level 3 and 7s with Dine and Tias specifically, with Tias being an absolutely insane piece of support to boost the deck up further into the meta with both its easier summon than Megalo and its search on summon. In addition to this, Trite gives the archetype a good target to summon using Bahamut Shark, which was always an option for the deck to make but lacked a solid target to summon. This support would make Mermail even more of a threat in the metagame than it already was, which we'll see soon enough. Prophecy would receive a couple of new pieces, with the most notable being Master, able to copy the effect of a normal spellbook engrave as long as you control at least one spellcaster on the field and can reveal another spellbook in hand, allowing the chain that began with Blue Boy and Secrets to continue further, allowing spellbook decks to get additional counters onto Starhall and additional names into the grave for Fate. Diamond Dire Wolf is a new rank 4 staple piece that can pop a tri-type you control and a card the opponent controls, able to pop itself with this effect, becoming the go-to rank 4 removal option. Lightning Chidori is a wind-locked rank 4 that spins a set card to the bottom of the deck on summon, and can detach to stack a face-up card on top of the deck, an insanely powerful option for wind decks, though there were none in the meta at the time. Crimson Blader is a level 8 OCG import synchro that, if it destroys a monster in battle, locks the summoning of high-level monsters from the opponent the following turn, which while not useful on release would become extremely relevant within the next few months. Breakthrough Skill is a trap that negates the effects of a face-up monster that turn, then it can be banished from grave on your turn, except the turn it's put there, to do it again, becoming a solid option for multiple monster effect stuns. All in all, Cosmo Blazer, while not being a meta upheaval set, did many things right in pushing the meta slightly in a new direction, complemented by the structure deck release that came 2 weeks later. Onslaught of the Fire Kings. Release date February 8th, 2013. Set type Structure Deck. Major strategies Fire King. Impact another fire archetype, not nearly as relevant. Onslaught of the Fire Kings was the fire structure deck counterpart to last year's Atlantean water structure deck, and as such it introduced the Fire King archetype, a series of tri-typed fire monsters who were designed to be spiritual successors to Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys from the DM era, with their boss monster, High Avatar Garunix, having an almost identical effect, reviving itself the turn after it's destroyed by card effect, nuking all monsters on the field when it did. In addition to him, Barong could search for a Fire King card the turn after it's destroyed by a card effect. Onslaught of the Fire King lets you, if you control no monsters and the opponent does, summon a fire tri-type from deck, destroying it in the end phase, and Circle lets you pop a fire on field to revive a fire in grave, giving you easy access to Garunix as well as the original Nephthys with most of the enabling support. Unfortunately, the deck as it stood, while explosive, was extremely telegraphed and delayed in its impact, relegating the strategy to simply a rogue option for the time being. Reprints here included Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, Manticore of Darkness, Rekindling, and Pot of Duality, with the Duality reprint being a solid inclusion for deck sales. YCS Miami would be held the next weekend, and Windup would once again reclaim its spot as top deck in the meta, including first place piloted by Travis Smith. Merlantian was right behind it though in representation, with a few players notably cutting Genex Undyne from the list due to finally hitting that key point of enough good Mermail names to no longer need it, although a couple would still play it. Firefist would see its first top cut appearance here, notably playing Rescue Rabbit to access Vorse Raider for the Tiger King push, which would be iterated on in the coming weeks to instead be Gene Warped Warwolf, the strongest Beast Warrior normal monster. YCS Bochum would be held a week later, and while Windup would once again take the King's Slice as well as the top spot piloted by Alpay Ingene, Firefist's popularity in the EU was a completely different story from its original performance stateside, with 3 different variants popping up, being the Rabbit variant we saw last week, a stun variant playing Beast King Barbaros, who could be boosted with the fire formations, and even a Fire King variant, utilizing the Fire King spell traps to access Bear, Gorilla, and even Flamvell Fire Dog. YCS Santiago would be held the same weekend, and if the US was leaning Mermail and the EU was leaning Firefist, then South America was clearly leaning towards Macro Rabbit, being the most popular deck of the event, taking first place piloted by Jose Raul. Macrocosmos tended to have a significantly positive matchup with the various decks in the format due to most being reliant on the graveyard to set up either their main play lines or heavier recursion pieces, giving Macro Rabbit a good field to play against for this event specifically. Following the opening YCSs of the year, the ban list would be updated on March 1st, bringing a fairly small number of changes but without question being impactful ones. Newly banned were Sangan, a targeted hit at both its generic searchability as well as tour guide, and Windup Carrier Zenmaity, effectively crushing the best extra deck monster in archetype for windups, but the hits would keep coming. Newly limited were Windup Magician, killing the board flooding of the deck as now you needed more gas than ever to access Shockmaster, One Day of Peace, heavily crippling the extension of alt WinCon decks, and Solemn Warning, a staple piece of the Solemn Brigade as it was referred to, now matching its counterpart of Judgment. Newly semi-limited were Ryo, nerfing stun strategies fairly hard, Tsukiyomi, bringing back the GOAT format staple, and Advanced Ritual Art, as the Demise OTK was effectively gone for good now. Lastly, unlimited were Kalut, Lumina, Mindcrush, Spore, and Sheen Smoke Signal, all cards for decks of previous metagames that were, in fairness, mid for the current space. This particular ban list's target was clearly Windup, and the 2 targeted hits at the deck landed powerfully, taking the meta powerhouse almost completely out of the scene, though would still see some play as a rogue to tier 3 strategy. At this time, we also received a couple of side releases that would mostly do nothing to the metagame, starting with Starpack 2013 on March 1st, which changed nothing at all, followed by Zexal Collection 10 on March 8th, which did bring 2 new useful exceeds to the meta in Starliege Paladynamo, a new rank 4 option for light strategies, and number 61 Volcasaurus, a new staple in the rank 5 slot. The first testing grounds of this new metaspace would be YCS Austin on March 23rd, and with Windup almost completely gone, taking only 1 spot in the top cut here, Mermail was left to completely dominate the space, taking 15 of the top 32 in addition to first place piloted by Oscar Zelaya, showcasing the current version of the deck, which had completely eliminated the Gen X package. Geargia would begin to see some movement here with Windup out of the picture, still utilizing Machina for instant threats of Fortress or the Karakuris for access to Synchro 7 and 8 pools. Probably the most interesting deck taking a spot here was the Electrum OTK, a newer OTK development that required just 2 cards to pull off, being Fusion Gate and Chain Material. By using Chain Material, you can fuse using materials in the deck and grave for the entire turn by banishing them, which meshes well with Fusion Gate, allowing you to fuse as many times as you want in a turn, allowing you to fuse for Elemental Hero Electrum, who shuffles all banished monsters into deck on Fusion Summon, allowing you to make a second, shuffle again, overlay the 2 for Gustav Max, burn for 2000, fuse the Gustav in the graved Electrum for Gaia, the Gaia in the second Electrum for Shining, and then make a third Electrum to shuffle back all the materials to do it again, burning for game after 4 loops. YCS San Diego would be 2 weeks later on April 6th, though a disclosure needs to be made about the top cut breakdown here. Prior to top 32, players played using a Battle Pack Epic Dawn sealed draft deck, meaning that just because a deck is in the top cut here doesn't mean that the deck made it through by its own merit. Angel Asensio would take the event on Mermail, as to be expected due to the deck's popularity and power in the current format. Last event from this block was YCS San Jose 2 weeks later, and from the top 16, we'd see Firefist taking a split of the representation from Mermail, with Bear Control builds taking center stage, using the remainder of the Firefist pieces to effectively get yourself to Bear. Jorge Valverde would take the event on Bubble Beat, showcasing the deck's ability to continue topping despite its hits from late 2012 by accessing bursts of power through Blade Armor Ninja and Absolute Zero. This would lead into the next Hidden Arsenal set release, and although the last couple had been quite underwhelming in the grand scheme, this one was set to upend all preconceived notions of failure. Hidden Arsenal 7 Night of the Stars. Release date April 26, 2013. Set type Deck Building Set. Major strategies Constellar, Evil Swarm, Extra Deck Staples. Impact an upheaval of the rank 4 pool. Hidden Arsenal 7 would be the final standalone Hidden Arsenal set for a long period of time, and the series was not about to just sit back and die quietly. It was set to go out with a massive bang by not only introducing 2 new strategies to the meta, but also by completely revolutionizing the generic Exceed pool by giving most archetypes from the last couple of sets a generic Exceed that did something uniquely powerful. Starting with Gem Knights, they wouldn't receive an Exceed like most of the others, but would receive a couple of new key cards for later impact, like Lazuli, who adds a normal monster from grave to hand when sent to grave, Seraphonite, a fusion of a Gem Knight and a light monster that can provide an extra normal summon each turn, and Master Diamond, a fusion of 3 Gem Knights that can banish a level 7 or lower Gem Knight fusion from grave to copy its name and effect that turn. Each of these would find important slots in Gem Knight strategies in the future, with Lazuli and Master Diamond becoming backbones of a Gem Knight OTK with the release in 2014, and Seraphonite finding a completely unexpected home in 2015, which we'll cover both when we get there. Laval would see a singular new relevant card, being Lavalval Chain, a rank 4 that could detach to either bin a card from deck or stack a monster on top of the deck. Without exaggeration or hyperbole, this is to this day considered one of the strongest Exceeds ever printed, as it would do so much for so many strategies simply by being a Foolish Burial on legs, which would spark a complete revitalization of a certain strategy within the next few weeks. Gishki would be one of the strategies here that got a bit of the short end of the stick, but would receive 1 new boss monster, being Zeal Gigas, a level 10 ritual that could pay 1000 life to draw a card, then shuffle a card on field into deck if it was a Gishki monster. Zeal Gigas was yet another loop enabler for the deck, this time by being a draw tool that happened to be level 10, meaning it gave the deck access to Gustav Max, and stop me if you've heard this one before. Ironically though, this would not be the best card released for Gishki in this set, but we'll get there soon enough. Gusto would similarly receive a new Exceed tool, that being Daigusto Emerald, a rank 4 that could detach to shuffle 3 monsters in grave back into deck and draw 1, being effectively a mini Pot of Avarice on legs, seeing play for that reason initially, but in later formats being an enabler for some of the most degenerate loops in the game's history. Constellar would be the first of the 2 new archetypes here, overtaking Vylon's light attribute slot, being a series of differently leveled light monsters aimed at using level modulation to access their various extra deck bosses. These included Algaty, who specials a Constellar from hand on normal, Pollux, who gives you an extra normal for a Constellar the turn it's normal summoned, Kaus, who could level modulate a Constellar by 1 twice per turn, Pleiades, a light locked rank 5 that could detach to bounce a card on a quick effect once per turn, and Ptolemy M7, a rank 6 that could be overlaid onto a Constellar Exceed, locking its other effect that turn if you do, and could detach 1 to bounce a monster from field or grave to hand once per turn. This strategy would, on release, see no play, as the primary issue it faced was consistency, as every monster that searched in archetype was not a level 4, locking what plays you could do on the turn they're used. That isn't to say the deck would be locked in an unplayable camp forever, as some experimentation would be done with the deck regularly to attempt a Pleiades turbo strategy in addition to Ptolemy M7 entering the staple rank 6 pool immediately, helping many decks like Heradic, but also enabling loops with Gishki thanks to being makeable with Mind August and Gustkraken, which is part of the reason Gustkraken was limited so far in advance. The other new archetype here was Evil Swarm, the dark replacement for Steel Swarms, although more notably could be considered an upgraded version due to most of their support specifying L-Swarm monsters, meaning that they work with both Evil Swarm and Steel Swarm strategies, though were clearly built for this one. This initial wave included Heliotrope, a normal level 4 for rabbit shenanigans, O-Lantern, who could tribute itself to pop a face-up monster, Mandragora, who could special itself if your opponent controls more monsters, Castor, who gives an additional normal the turn it's normaled, Thunderbird, who can banish itself when an effect is used and return itself in the next standby phase, their rank 4's Nightmare, who can detach to flip a monster that gets special summoned face down, Bahamut, who can detach and discard an L-Swarm to steal an opponent's monster, Ophion, who locks level 5 and higher special summons while it has materials and can detach to search an infestation spell trap, or Boros, a 3-mat that can detach to activate one of its effects, but only once each while on the field, being bouncing an opponent's card, hand-ripping one, or banishing a card from the opponent's grave, Infestation Pandemic, a quick play spell that makes Evil Swarms immune to spell traps that turn, and Infection, which trades an L-Swarm in hand or on field for another one in deck. There's probably one specific Exceed I mentioned there that stood out compared to the rest, and yes, Ophion Control became the name of the game for Evil Swarm strategies, matching up incredibly well into Mermail by locking them out of their level 7 Swarmers, but still being a bit of a bad matchup into the rest of the meta spread for now. YCS Lyle would be held the same weekend, and notably the new Hidden Arsenal set seemed to make zero impact on the scene, with Mermails continuing to dominate the meta, taking first place here piloted by Long Dao, incorporating the Gen X package back in. However, the set would see an impact on YCS Meadowlands 2 weeks later on May 12th, and this particular event is regularly revisited in retroplay due to its shocking diversity following Hidden Arsenal 7's release, with a couple of new decks popping up from these pieces. The first, and most obvious, was Evil Swarm, sporting a Rescue Rabbit package here to access Ophion quickly and reliably, sporting a whole suite of back row to play Defend the Castle once summoned, including one of the first big appearances of Safe Zone in the metagame, a choice that would grow more popular later in the year with the release of another Exceed to help Evil Swarm's game plan. The other big shakeup was the first appearance of Exceed Infernity, using rank 4 swarming enablers like Summoner Monk and Stygian Street Patrol to get you to the Lavalval chain quickly, who in turn set up your grave for your singular copy of Launcher to do as much work as it possibly could, or to stack Archfiend on top of the deck for its own summon effect to trigger. Tyree Tinsley would take the event on Mermail, once again showing the consistent power of the meta threat, back to cutting the Gen X package out. Unfortunately to many players, Meadowlands format is also known as the end of early Zexal, as many decks that were viable here, the great diversity that had been cultivated, and the vibe that almost any strategy could compete was about to be completely shattered, as the player base braced itself for what we've known was coming for months. We were about to enter the Dragon's Den. Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy. Release date, May 17th, 2013. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Dragon Ruler, Spellbook, Mecha Phantom Beast. Impact, the meta capsizes. Let's be completely fair on this one. Anyone who knows any bit of the history of this game knows that this particular set would be the first of a couple major turning points in the game's history. Starting here, and moving into the next year of releases, Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game would shift from the core concepts of the early years into what we really know now as the modern version of the game, and it all started with the release of the Dragon Rulers. The Dragon Rulers are a series of level 7 dragons, one of each elemental attribute, being Redox for Earth, Tidal for Water, Blaster for Fire, and Tempest for Wind, each sharing the same 3 abilities. Able to summon themselves from hand or grave by banishing 2 monsters that are either dragons or their attribute from hand or grave, able to search a dragon of their attribute when banished, and each having a unique ability that activates by discarding themselves with another monster of their attribute, with Redox reviving a monster, Tidal dumping a monster from deck, Blaster popping a card on field, and Tempest searching for any dragon, with each only being able to use one of these effects a turn. In addition, they each had a baby counterpart that could be discarded alongside any monster that's either a dragon or shares its attribute to summon its corresponding dragon ruler from deck. These cards would completely upend the established metagame, taking over and dominating the game for the remainder of the year, and with many considering the impending format of Dragon Ruler format to be one of the most skill-intensive formats of all time, which we'll go more in depth on with the next major tournament. In the meantime though, an extremely notable point for the deck here was that the Dragon Ruler cards themselves maxed out at the rare rarity slot, making the entire archetype shockingly cheap for the time. However, because of this, the entire value of the deck, in turn, quickly pumped into the rank 7 extra deck pool, with the previously released Big Eye spiking immediately on reveal that these would be low rarity. A similar fate would befall the Mecha Phantom Beast cards released here, an archetype of monsters focused around summoning and utilizing their archetypal tokens, with Tetherwolf being a level 4 that summons a token and adds the level of all tokens onto itself, making itself a level 7 on summon, and their rank 7 Exceed Draco Sack, who can detach a material to summon 2 tokens and contribute Mecha Phantom Beast cards to pop a card on field once per turn. Unable to be destroyed by battle or card effect while you control a token, Draco Sack would instantly hit the $100 plus club, being one of the best extra deck monsters to summon using the Dragon Rulers, who also formed an interesting dynamic with Big Eye specifically, forming a mind game between players in the mirror match, while Tetherwolf would be a normal summon tech for some builds, able to access Draco Sack with a token already on field for protection. Fire Fist would receive Leopard, a level 3 200 defense monster that could tribute itself to set a fire formation from deck, notable for both being summonable with Rekindling and Spirit, beginning the waves of support for the theorized 3-axis deck. Harpy would be the next major DM era archetype to receive the legacy support treatment, seeing Channeler, who could discard a Harpy card to summon another Harpy from deck, becoming a level 7 if you controlled a dragon, and Hysteric Sign, which searched Elegant Egotist on activation and searched for up to 3 different Harpies in the end phase of the turn it's put in grave. Both of these would be insanely strong pieces to make Harpy a viable rank 4 and 7 strategy, especially with the previously released Lightning Chidori, but unfortunately was competing with the strongest rank 7 strategy ever in the same set, as well as the already meta one. Speaking of, Mermail would receive Abyss Osha, able to trade a Mermail on field for any number in deck whose total level equals that monster's, and Abyss Scale of the Mizuchi, providing a spell negation on resolution of activation, both being powerful tools for Mermail to adapt with. Madolche would receive Hootcake, a level 3 beast that could special summon a Madolche from deck by banishing a monster in grave, specifically useful for summoning Messengelato from deck to trigger its search effect with a Madolche beast already being on board. King of the Feral Imps is a rank 4 that searches for any reptile monster, becoming a staple part of various extra decks over the next few years by being able to grab a random reptile extender for strategies. Sacred Sword of 7 stars can banish a level 7 in hand to draw 2, being a draw tool that felt almost tailor-made for Dragon Rulers to use and abuse. Geargia Gear is a trap that could summon 2 Geargiano monsters from deck, boosting their levels by 1, giving you instant access to the rank 4 Exceed pool while also increasing the playability of the previously overlooked level 3 Geargias. Mind Drain was the third of the Drain continuous traps, able to prevent effects in hand from activating, locking hand traps and some summon effects. Totem Bird was a TCG exclusive wind-locked rank 3, able to negate a spell trap by detaching 2, seeing some play in later rank 3 wind strategies. Noble Arms of Destiny is yet another solid Noble Arms spell, giving its monster protection from destruction once per turn, slotting into the Noble Knight strategy instantly. Constellar and Evil Swarm would see their OCG imports here in Sombre and Kerkion, who had the same effect just for their respective archetypes, able to banish an archetypal monster in grave to add another to hand, then providing an additional normal summon that turn for their archetype. Of the two, Kerkion would see the immediate success thanks to Evil Swarm already being a popular option in the meta, giving another tool to turbo into Ophion. Though Constellar would also receive Omega, a light-locked rank 4 that can detach to make Constellars immune to spells and traps that turn, becoming a solid rank 4 option for light decks in general. Lastly, and by far the most important card outside of the Dragon Rulers themselves, Spellbook of Judgment could, at the end of the turn you activate it, search for different spellbooks for each spell you activated after its resolution, and summon a spellcaster monster whose level is equal to or lower than the number you added. This was one of the biggest resource plussing cards ever printed, able to reliably reach 3+ spellbooks off of its activation, and summon a powerful spellcaster afterward, commonly reaching either Jowgen to lock special summons or Kaiku to lock banishing from the grave against dragon rulers. This one card would push spellbooks from their previously tier 3 level status to the go-to deck that wasn't named dragon rulers, which we'll discuss more about soon enough. Following Tachyon, there would be a couple of much smaller releases, starting with Super Starter V for Victory almost a month later, being the year's starter deck and containing no new cards worth talking about. The second would be the second battle pack, War of the Giants, 2 weeks after the starter decks, which was mostly notable for shifting what set was played for sealed events moving forward, but also for having a couple of interesting reprints, such as Card D, Mermail Abyss Megalo, Pot of Duality, and Breakthrough Skill. The WC circuit for the year would be shortly after this release, starting with the European WCQ on June 29th, and although we do not have a full picture of the top cut like we would like, there was a clear winner for the new top deck of the format. Dragon Ruler had taken over, with most builds already centralizing around a few specific cards. The first point was the ratios of the rulers to babies was already fairly set, seeing 3 of each ruler and 2 of each baby across multiple lists. The second was the inclusion of Super Rejuvenation at its maximum 3 copies commonly, as by discarding with the baby effects, you would receive 2 draws at the end of the turn with Rejuvenation, or 4 if you use 2 baby effects that turn, which in turn could get you to another Rejuvenation, which as a quick play spell could be activated in the end phase after drawing it to draw even more. The third was Gold Sarcophagus, which was being played at 2 to 3 copies, able to banish a ruler from the deck to trigger its search effect for a baby, which in turn got you to the main ruler regardless, and the inclusion of level 1 tuners like Effect Feeler and Dragunity Korseska to access the level 8 Synchro pool, specifically Crimson Blader, who locked up the mirror match itself quite effectively. Fourth, and probably most telling for the future of the game, was a specific card that found its way into a few side decks here, being Vanity's Emptiness. The trap from Shining Darkness was finally being recognized for the power it represented, allowing you to set up your board with the rulers, then flip this on your opponent's turn to block them from doing the same. This was extra effective in the mirror match at this point, as few players played back row removal in the deck outside of the singular Heavy Storm, meaning to out it, commonly one would need Blaster and another Fire to do the job. However, very notably, Dragon Ruler would not take the event overall, with that honor going to Chris Bodolaudis on Spellbook, playing a large suite of 26 spells to chain activations after Judgment to activate the various tools to counter Dragon Ruler's dominance in the format, with both Jowgen and Kaiku locking different aspects of the deck. Jowgen specifically would be a really interesting piece here, as its 1300 defense body actually proved to be rather difficult to out for Dragon Rulers, as the only normal summon in the deck that could do it natively was Stream, being 1600 attack, meaning that outside of that, the only reliable card to out it was similarly the Blaster Pop. Evil Swarm would also perform quite well here for 2 major reasons. The first, and most obvious, was Ophion locking the Dragon Ruler summons in addition to the summon of High Priestess from the Spellbook matchup, only being outable by a few specific cards thanks to Infestation Pandemic providing protection, which was searchable by Ophion. The second, and less obvious to the naked eye, was the price point. With the entire deck being effectively found in Hidden Arsenal 7, the deck was shockingly affordable compared to its competitors, which led to the deck's performance being boosted, even though it was clearly the weakest of the 3. The South American WCQ would take place the same weekend, and a lot of the points we've just discussed would be present here too, with Rulers taking 15 top spots, followed by Spellbooks at 8 and Evil Swarm at 7, though notably all 7 Evil Swarm would be eliminated moving into top 16. Carlos Perez would take the event on Dragon Rulers, playing a similar build to what we saw in Europe, but notably including 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill as a way to out Ophion's lock with the 2 vanities in the side for locking out the mirror match. The Central American WCQ would be a week later, and at this stage, Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks had narrowed the field around them to a knockout-dragout war between the 2 titans, with Alejandro Suarez taking the event on Rulers, who did not make his list public. While there was one more WCQ event with coverage we can go through, there would be one more set release prior to it occurring, and though it wouldn't bring too much new to the table, it would be important to cover it for one card that would change the dynamic of Dragon Rulers heavily. Number Hunters. Release date, July 11th, 2013. Set type, Import Set. Major strategies, various OCG exclusive Exceeds. Impact, a couple of interesting exceeds for the pool. Number Hunters was probably one of the most out-of-nowhere sets for us to receive, right up there with Star Pack just a little bit earlier this year. In reality, the set was an import set to catch us up with some of the OCG's exclusive exceeds monsters up to this point, most of which were incredibly niche, but held their uses, such as number 49 Fortune Tune as a time win con, number 85 Crazy Box as a drain beat boss, Mech-Quipped Engineer as a stall option, Coach King Giant Trainer as a draw tool for rank 8 strategies, and, most importantly for our context, number 74 Master of Blades, a rank 7 that can negate and destroy a card that targets it, popping another card on field when it does. This would solve a major issue with the Dragon Ruler mirror match, that being what threat to make going first. For most matchups, going first you'd want to make Dracosack to set up a wall protected by its tokens, but in the mirror match this could be completely upended by the summon of an opposing Big Eye, stealing the Dracosack and making the situation far worse. Master of Blades solves that issue, giving the deck a turn 1 option that didn't lose to Big Eye, which we'd see soon enough. The North American WCQ would be held the same weekend, and, shockingly, we'd see Dragon Ruler continue to dominate the space, taking first place piloted by Patrick Hoban, notably main decking 2 copies of Vanity's Emptiness, prepping for the mirror in the main deck, as it was reasonably going to be the most common matchup. This would end the WCQ circuit for the year and lead into the next core set prior to the World Championships in a month, and any hope of seeing a meta not dominated by Dragon Rulers would entirely rest on this new set. Judgment of the Light. Release date August 9th, 2013. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Bujin, Trap Tricks, Fire Fist. Impact, setting up the meta half a year away. Judgment of the Light is an odd set looking back on it in retrospect, not because it was bad, not by a long shot, but because even though a number of strategies released here would be meta, they were completely overshadowed on release due to the dragons raging in the background. The first of the new strategies of note was Bujin, a series of Beast Warrior Bujins and Beast and Winged Beast Bujinjis, with the Bujinjis providing some benefit to a Beast Warrior Bujin on the board by either discarding themselves or banishing themselves from grave. This initial wave included Yamato, who could add a Bujin from deck to hand in the end phase, discarding a Bujin if you did, Quillin, able to be banished from grave while you control a Beast Warrior Bujin to pop a face-up card, Turtle, able to banish itself from grave to negate a card that targets a Bujin, Crane, able to discard itself to double a Beast Warrior Bujin's attack in the damage step, Susanoo, a Bujin locked rank 4 that can attack all monsters once each and can detach to either search or dump a Bujin, and Bujin Carnation, which summons a Bujin from grave and the banished zone while you control no monsters but the opponent does. Bujin was one of the strongest examples ever of a helmet deck, basically aiming to stick Yamato and throw all protection onto it, being a simple concept of get the helmet and put on the damn helmet. An incredibly basic strategy, but had bones, needing a couple more worthwhile main deck Beast Warrior Bujins to be worth it. The other new archetype here was Trap Tricks, a series of earth insects and plants that interact with the normal Trap Hole cards, like the classic Trap Hole and the meta staple Bottomless Trap Hole, all being immune to Hole normal traps. This first wave included Murmello, who searched a Hole normal trap on normal summon and pops a spell trap on special summon, Nepenthes, who searches or summons a Trap Tricks from the deck if you activate a Hole normal trap, and Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare, a trap that negates and destroys a special summoned monster that activates an effect the turn it's summoned. This archetype did hold potential out the gate thanks to Murmello searching the ever popular Bottomless on normal summon, but would clearly need more support to do anything impactful in the metagame. Fire Fist would receive its most pivotal wave of support yet, being Rooster, an OCG import that, if special summoned by a Fire Fist effect, searches a Fire Fist monster, able to send a fire formation to grave to set another from deck. This would be the piece that finally brought the 3-axis version of the deck together, able to search a copy of Spirit on Revive from a copy of Spirit or an initial summon from Horse Prince, cycle a fire formation, then either make a rank 3 or a level 6 synchro, giving the strategy the follow-up potential it needed so badly. Unfortunately, the support would be too late for the deck to do anything relevant due to the environment around it and the next ban list, which would take effect prior to the first YCS it could potentially do anything at. Moving into other cards in the set, Galaxy Surfeit was a normal level 2 dragon tuner, useful for some Heraldic and dragon strategies for hitting certain levels in the extra deck. Mask Chameleon revives a 0 defense monster on summon, providing synchro and exceed access for specific strategies that happen to be searchable by King of the Feral Imps, which would come up in later formats. Flying Sea was the next Sea hand trap, able to summon itself to the opponent's board and lock exceed summons, seeing some experimentation. Armades Keeper of Boundaries was the newest Synchro 5 staple, able to stun effects while attacking, seeing play in any deck that could make him. Star Eater was a level 11 Synchro whose summon couldn't be stopped or responded to, and became immune to card effects while attacking, becoming an option for the Dragon Ruler extra deck using level 4 tuners, like Debris Dragon. Number 66 Master Key Beetle was a dark locked rank 4 that could detach to select a card on field, protecting that card from destruction while on the field, and able to pop a protected card to protect itself, seeing play in Evil Swarm decks thanks to its ability to become an invincible threat by hitting Safe Zone onto itself, or to permanently lock special summons by targeting Vanity's Emptiness. Herald of Pure Light is a rank 2 that can add a card engraved back to hand, then shuffle a card in hand back into deck, being a decent recursion option for rank 2 decks. Transmodify was probably one of the most interesting pieces to experiment with from this set, able to send a monster to grave to summon a monster of the same type and attribute but one level higher from deck. Seeing experimentation with multiple strategies from Agents to Dark World, but finding a home in Infernity of all things due to being able to change a spent Necromancer into an Archfiend. Cockadoodle-Doo was a TCG exclusive that could be a level 3, 4, or 5 based on how you summon it, being an interesting tuner for some decks to play with. Noble Knight Dristan would be the first solid target to summon with Madrot, able to pop a face-up card on field when equipped with a Noble Arm spell, which would naturally happen through Madrot's effect popping its equip on summon. Coach Soldier Wolfbark was an OCG import that could revive a level 4 Fire Beast Warrior in Grave, being a rank 4 enabler specifically for Fire Fist and Fire King decks. Speaking of, Fire King Avatar Yaksha was an OCG import that could destroy a monster on field or in hand on destruction, being a solid enabler for Fire King that the deck was desperately missing. Lastly, Fencing Fire Ferret can, upon being destroyed, pop a face-up monster and burning the opponent, being an option for countering out specific meta threats. The 2013 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship would be held the same weekend, and unsurprisingly, with all of the pieces of the deck available in both regions, Dragon Ruler absolutely dominated this tournament, taking 6 of the top 8, leaving only 2 spots for spellbooks. Huang Xian of Taiwan would take the event with the aforementioned Dragon Rulers, claiming the title of World Champion for 2013, but there was one specific inclusion in his build that would be noted for all future iterations of the deck, that being Dragon Ravine, the Dragoonity field spell. Ravine had one major purpose here: help load Dragon Rulers into the graveyard, as by discarding a card once per turn, you could effectively gain a repeatable Foolish Burial for the deck, which would continue to see play long after this event. It also had the side benefit of searching Korseska if you needed a level 1 tuner. Following the world's performance of Dragon Ruler, the 2013 Collector's Tins would begin dropping, reprinting Blaster and Tidal in a much higher secret rarity, alongside super rare reprints of Karakuri Bure, Gagaga Cowboy, Fire Fist Bear, BLS, Catastor, and Gustav Max, with the latter being notable for releasing the card into the EU region for the first time. However, the far more culturally significant impact, in fact the arguably most significant impact of all of 2013 on the game, would take place shortly after on September 1st, being on the surface another ban list update, but this one was far different than any that came before it. Up until this point, the TCG ban list was a direct one-to-one copy of the OCG's ban list, which, notably, meant that we were receiving hits months in advance of the releases they were actually put in place for. Starting with this ban list, the TCG and OCG would officially split from each other, with the TCG now updating their ban list completely separately from the OCG, commonly referred to as the TCG-OCG split in the player base. Ironically, this would also be the largest ban list in the history of the game so far, seeing 15 bans, 18 limits, 5 semi-limits, and 9 unlimits, for a total of 47 changes in all. So let's dive in. Newly banned were the 4 Baby Rulers and Super Rejuvenation, directly targeted at kneecapping Dragon Rulers, Elemental Hero Stratos, aimed at the various Hero Beat decks, number 16 Shockmaster, the final nail in the coffin for Wind-Up, Card Destruction, the power play card of Dark Worlds, Gateway of the Six, putting an end to Six Samurai's pop-up nature, Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, Pot of Avarice, and Solemn Judgment, hits to the meta staples, Spellbook of Judgment, killing the modern iteration of spellbooks outright, and Ultimate Offering, a spam summon card that hadn't caused many issues yet, but was clearly a ticking time bomb. Newly limited were Atlantean Dragoons and Deep Sea Diva as hit to Merlantian, Fire Fist Spirit as a hit to 3-axis, Constellar Ptolemy M7 and Evagishki Mind August hits to a Gishki loop, Duloran to prevent more loops, Genex Ally Birdman as a staple tuner, Rescue Rabbit, the cornerstone of various rank 4 strategies, Thunder King Ryo, Dimensional Fissure, Royal Tribute, Eradicator Epidemic Virus, Macrocosmos, and Soul Drain all as hits to stun decks. Gold Sarcophagus as a hit to Dragon Rulers, and Bottomless, Compulse, and Torrential as hits to the staple trap line. Newly semi-limited were Tenki, a hit to Beast Warrior decks, Dimensional Prison, a hit to the staple trap, and Mizuki, Plague Spreader, and TG Striker all coming back from 1. Lastly, unlimited were Destiny Hero Malicious, the Agent of Mystery Earth, Tsukiyomi, A Hero Lives, Black Whirlwind, E-Emergency Call, Erratic Seal of Convocation, Pot of Duality, and Scapegoat, being a wave of cleanup. Needless to say, something was bound to change here, but on reveal, even though a lot was hit, there were glaring omissions. Even though the rulers lost the babies, Rejuve, and 2 of their gold sarks, the deck remained shockingly competent with all 4 rulers still legal at 3 copies each. And now that spellbooks were out of the way, there was no deck to really stand up against them. YCS Brussels would be held the same day as this list, though notably wouldn't be affected by it due to being a sealed pack YCS, using the new War of the Giants draft pack. These YCSs are always the more interesting to cover thanks to dispelling the rumor that drafting is all luck when in reality it is heavily built on the back of deck building skill, which we'd see thanks to the finals being between some of EU's most consistent faces at the time, being Peter Gross and Michael Gruner, with Gruner taking the event in a 2-1 finals match, claiming the YCS title and the first copy of the newest YCS prize card, number 106 Giant Hand. This particular prize card reveal was a little controversial, as in recent years the prize card has been decent, but not something you'd really want to play in a meta deck, as compared to the SJC days where prize cards were extremely meta relevant and caused many issues in pricing. This time though, Giant Hand, while not the strongest rank 4 out there, did fill a niche in the rank pool by providing monster effect negation, leading it to actually see play during its prize card stint run, much to the horror of budget players. YCS Toronto would be held the same day, and this event would paint a much more clear picture of the meta fallout, with there being no real top deck following the hits, seeing a new variant of Dragon Rulers, that being Dragon Ruler Plants, rise into the top meta position, though not in a convincing manner. The deck had pivoted to focus more on the Synchro Pool axis that had been experimented with prior, adding in more tuners than just the odd level 1s this time, like the Bree Dragon, in addition to the level modulating tuners like Spore, giving you access to the level 11 pool for Star Eater. Spellbooks would pivot back to their own boss monsters for an endgame, such as High Priestess and World, giving the deck a far different feel than it had pre-ban list. Dragoonity Ruler would be the other interesting development here, leaning hard into the recently discovered Dragon Ravine to not only fuel the rulers, but also to access the level 8 Synchro Pool easily through Dux and Phalanx, making it to top 4 here. Edward Kwong would take the event on a more pure variant of Dragon Rulers, though notably still playing Dandelion from the plant package, just not the rest of it, also leaning into the Dragon Ravine discovery himself. Though the top cut here feels a lot more diverse than it was before, in reality 7 of the top 16 were just different flavors of Ruler, showing that despite the hits, nothing had really changed about them being the best deck, with the only question being which variant to play. And another variant was about to throw their hat into the ring with the next structure deck releasing 2 weeks later. Saga of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Release date September 13th, 2013. Set type Structure Deck. Major strategies Blue Eyes. Impact another variant on the pile. Saga of Blue Eyes was an interestingly timed structure deck, releasing a wave of new support for Blue Eyes and general dragon support right at a time when dragons were more popular than ever. For Blue Eyes specifically, they received Maiden with Eyes of Blue, a tuner that, if attacked, summoned a Blue Eyes White Dragon from hand, deck, or grave, negates the attack, and swaps her battle position, and if targeted, summons a Blue Eyes as well, being a casual player's worst nightmare, requiring non-targeted, non-battle removal, or the ability to deal with both her and the dragon she summons. They also received Azure Eyes Silver Dragon, a level 9 synchro requiring a normal monster non-tuner that gives dragons you control card effect targeting and destruction prevention on summon, and can revive a normal monster during each of your standby phases, being clearly intended as a boss for Blue Eyes specifically, but being extremely niche in its applications. Outside of Blue Eyes' specific support, the deck also brought Silver's Cry, a revival spell for dragon normal monsters, and Dragon Shrine, a foolish burial for dragons that can bend 2 dragons if the first one was a normal monster. Silver's Cry would fall into an extremely niche position on release, but Dragon Shrine would actually see some experimentation in Dragon Ruler specifically thanks to it being able to bend 2 dragons at once, as the deck already played a normal monster usually in Flamvel Guard to access the double bend effect, though this would be niche for a time. Reprints here included Hieratic Dragon of Tefnuit, Trade-In, Cards of Consonance, 1-for-1, Monster Reborn, which had just been banned, Fiendish Chain, and Compulse, being a decent wave of staple reprints and useful tools. Following 2 weeks later would be another first of its kind set, being the Judgment of the Light Deluxe Edition, which is effectively an upgraded version of the previous special editions, but notably held printings of 2 cards that would be coming in the next core set, being Dragon Shield and Vampire Kingdom, though neither of these cards would be useful. YCS San Mateo would be held a week after that on October 6th, and clearly Dragon Ruler had once again fully taken over, seeing 12 total top spots between its pure and Dragoonity variants, taking first place piloted by Merlin Schumacher on a more pure variant. The Ravine inclusion was no longer a tech, it was now a staple in every version of the deck, marking what would become known as Ravine Ruler format for the remainder of the year, but that distinction was about to get worse. We had another Legendary Collection release coming in the next week, and though it appeared to be unassuming, it was about to bring something down on the format that would cause the next 2 months of the game for some to become absolutely unbearable. Legendary Collection 4 Joey's World. Release date October 11th, 2013. Set type reprint set. Major strategies anything touched by Joey in the original anime. Impact 1 import that should have stayed out. Legendary Collection Joey's World is an odd release in retrospect, much like a lot of this year in the game, bringing reprints of a bunch of older DM era cards, many of which are banned, just like Yugi's World before it, but also importing a single OCG card far after its ban in the OCG, which we'll talk about shortly. First of all, the reprints. Jinzo, Fiberjar, Red Eyes Wyvern, Red MD, Raigeki, Monster Reborn, Pot of Greed, Giant Trunade, Premature Burial, Scapegoat, Foolish Burial, Bottomless, Feather Duster, Lava Golem, Mirror Force, Solemn Judgment, the Dark World Core, Necro Valley, Heavy Storm, MST, Rhoda, Super Rejuve, Book of Moon, Pot of Avarice, Trade-In, Torrential, Compulse, and Imperial Iron Wall would all be reprinted here, with most of these already being banned in the current format. However, Joey's World also released a card that's been banned for years now that was finally imported from the OCG, being Sixth Sense, a trap that lets you call 2 results on a die, roll it, and if it's a number you called, you draw that many cards, otherwise milling the result. This card had been banned in the OCG since March of 2005, and when it was printed here, we all expected that that would hold. However, Konami apparently had a different idea. On October 11th, the same day as Joey's World's release, Sixth Sense was put to Limited on the TCG ban list, meaning that, at least until the next ban list, the card was legal to use in the TCG. And I'm sure that that won't cause any kind of issues having a draw 5 or 6 or mill 1 to 4 in a format dominated by a deck that loves to play out of the graveyard. Just 2 weeks after this, Weekly Shonen Jump Alpha would finally release a promo worth talking about this year, being Vulcan the Divine, a level 6 synchro that bounces a card you control and a card the opponent controls on synchro summon, locking you from using that bounced card for the rest of the turn, being a clause clearly placed on it to prevent loops. This would be a solid inclusion to the level 6 synchro pool moving forward, not quite becoming staple, but remaining a solid option to include. YCS London would be held 3 days after that on October 27th, and wow, would you look at that! Dragon Rulers had fully gone into overdrive with Sixth Sense becoming legal, completely dominating the event and taking first place piloted by Patrick Ryder, with almost every publicly available list playing the new trap tool. On a much less important note, following that performance was the 5D's Manga Volume 5 release, which brought a new take on a classic synchro, being Stardust Spark Dragon, a level 8 that can make a monster unable to be destroyed once in a turn on a quick effect, being arguably weaker than the original Stardust but covering a more general spread of circumstances. This would lead us into the last set release of the year, and any hope for Dragon Ruler's reign ending anytime soon would have to rest on its shoulders. Shadow Specters. Release date November 7th, 2013. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Ghost Trick, Bujin, Noble Knight. Impact nothing until the beast is dropped. Shadow Specters was the final set release of 2013, and if it wanted to change anything, it really had the wrong card pool to do it, as this particular release would do nothing to the meta overall, merely setting up archetypes for their next waves. Starting with the headliner of the set, Ghost Trick was a series of fiends, spellcasters, and zombies focused on disruption and flipping cards face down, aimed at winning via a war of attrition in a way, with most main deck monsters sharing an effect to flip themselves face down once per turn. This introduction wave included Lantern, able to summon itself from hand face down if the opponent attacks directly or attacks a Ghost Trick, negating the attack, Spectre, able to summon itself from hand face down if a Ghost Trick is destroyed, drawing a card when you do, Zhangxi, able to search a Ghost Trick on flip whose level is less than or equal to your total number of face-up Ghost Tricks, Alucard, a rank 3 that can detach to pop a set card on field, Mansion, a field spell that blocks attacking face-down monsters and halves battle damage from non-Ghost Trick monsters, and Scare, able to flip any number of your monsters up, then flip monsters the opponent controls face down up to the number of Ghost Tricks you control. Ghost Tricks here would be considered a fun casual level option, but would be nowhere near strong enough to enter the meta, with their most relevant piece being Alucard as a contribution to the rank 3 staple pool. Bujin would receive its second main deck Beast Warrior in Mikazushi, able to summon itself from hand if a Beast Warrior Bujin is destroyed, able to search a Bujin spell trap in the end phase if a Bujin was sent from hand to grave that turn while you controlled it, and Kakutsuchi, a Beast Warrior locked rank 4 that can mill 5 on summon, boosting by 100 for each Bujin milled, able to prevent the destruction of a Beast Warrior Bujin by detaching a material. Just the inclusion of a second main deck Beast Warrior Bujin would increase the power of the deck significantly, though was still unable to perform well in the Dragon Ruler dominated environment. Noble Knights would receive another solid couple of cards in Boars, who is able to become level 5 while equipped with a Noble Arms card, and can reveal 3 Noble Arms in deck to add 1 at random to hand and put the rest in grave. And Sacred Noble Knight of King Artorigus, a Noble Knight locked rank 5 that equips up to 3 Noble Arms from grave to itself on summon, can detach 1 to pop a monster on field, and floats into a Noble Knight in grave on destruction. With this release, Noble Knights finally had a solid line to access on turn 1, with Madrat into Boars giving access to the rank 5 pool thanks to Boars grabbing another Noble Arm spell to make Madrat level 5 again. While competent now, Noble Knight would still not be meta, but with this release, the evolution of the TCG exclusive archetypes development process was on display, showing growth in their design space, now aimed at releasing batches of about 5 cards per core set for the current TCG exclusive archetype. While it was too late for Noble Knights to be saved realistically, it gave hope for the next TCG exclusive archetype to be a smash hit. As for some of the other releases here, Labradorite Dragon was another level 6 normal dragon for the Heraldic pool, giving the pool a tuner to use for their strategy. Mythic Tree and Water Dragons were a duo clearly intended to work with each other, with Water summoning itself if you control an Earth monster, and Tree able to copy the level of a Water Dragon you control to itself, giving access to a rank 8 by themselves. These would be experimented with in Dragon Rulers, as they could access the rank 8 pool, but also Tree could copy the level of a title onto itself for an additional rank 7 access point. The Baby Raccoon cards would also be released here, being Ponpoko, able to summon a level 2 beast from deck face down on normal summon, Tantan, who summons a level 2 beast from deck on flip, and number 64 Ronin Raccoon Sendayu, a beast locked rank 2 that can detach to summon a Kagemusha Raccoon token that matches the attack of the strongest monster on the field on summon, preventing itself from destruction while you control another beast, being a solid budget rogue level deck to play around with. Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand was a rank 8 that could detach on quick effect to make a monster unaffected by other effects that turn, negating its own effects, being a powerful rank 8 option for the pool. Mistake was a continuous trap that locked adding cards from deck to hand outside of drawing, being a solid side deck floodgate for certain matchups. Grisaille Prison, if you controlled a fusion, ritual, or tribute summoned monster, locks players from synchro and exceed summoning until the end of the opponent's next turn, being an extremely powerful floodgate option for certain strategies. Lastly, White Dragon Wyverburster and Black Dragon Collapse Serpent were OCG imports that can summon themselves by banishing the other attribute from grave, searching the other when sent to grave, being decent options for chaos strategies not seeing play now, but would be heavily considered in the future. 2 weeks later would be the second wave of the yearly collectible 10s, bringing secret rare versions of Tempest and Redox to finish out the series, alongside super rare reprints of Thunder Seahorse, Gear Gigant X, number 50 Black Ship of Corn, Diamond Direwolf, and Spellbook of the Master, reprinting some of the more valuable secret rares in the format in a much easier to access rarity and location. YCS Turin would follow a week after this on December 1st, being the final YCS of the year, and once again, Dragon Ruler would dominate thanks to the combination of Ravine and Sixth Sense. though shockingly would not take the event overall this time. That honor would go to Samuel Padigo on Karakuri Geargia, utilizing similar strategies to before, but now having added in the Geargiano monsters with Geargia gear to flood the board and access their rank 4s rapidly. Also utilizing a single copy of Redox as an extra body and a monster reborn of sorts. As for other developments here, Influence Dragon would begin to appear in some Dragon Ruler lists, being a level 3 tuner allowing access to Trident Dragion for sudden OTK pushes. Bujin would see a top here sporting Kaiser Coliseum to even the playing field a bit, able to comfortably sit on just Yamato for turns on end thanks to locking swarming from the opponent. Mythic Wood and Water Dragon would make the occasional appearance here and list to access the rank 8 pool for Dragon Rulers, specifically for Heliopolis, Giant Grinder, and the newly released Felgrand. And with that, 2013 in Yu-Gi-Oh! Would come to an end, seeing a bit of a shocking outcome for those who view these formats as Tier 0, as a very interesting result has come to my attention while researching this period. I've long stood as someone who said that the original Dragon Ruler format was not a Tier 0 format, and looking back on the results now, that is true. Prior to any hits, Dragon Ruler only took 31% of the representation in full, 52.5% when adjusted with the unknown list removed, which is far below the standard 65% threshold most Tier 0 formats are qualified by. However, a very interesting result occurs when you analyze the result of Dragon Ruler's post 6th Sense release. Of the top 64 spots available in the YCS's following 6th Sense's release, Dragon Ruler variants took a shocking 65.6% of the representation, 76.4% if you adjust for the unknown lists, which is above the threshold regardless of how you look at it. So interestingly enough, Dragon Ruler did have a Tier 0 format, just not the one everyone claims is the Tier 0 format, which would be quelled going into 2014, but that's a story for another day. As we exited 2013, a Tier 0 menace was raging on. With the last 2 YCSs of the year, we saw Dragon Rulers absolutely take over for a second time that year, with the main culprit this time being that of 6th Sense, which allowed you to completely set up off its activation regardless of the roll's result. With such an oppressive card causing a Tier 0 reign for Dragon Rulers right at the end of the year, a ban list would be put in place on January 1st, 2014, and knowing that, the hit shouldn't be surprising. Newly banned were Dragon Ravine, Return from the Different Dimension, and 6th Sense, all hits at Dragon Ruler, as well as Self-Destruct Button, a card that simply had caused too many headaches for tournament play to remain legal. Newly limited were all 4 Dragon Rulers, Debris Dragon, and Sacred Sword of 7 Stars, as hits to Dragon Ruler, Divine Wind of the Mist Valley in response to a couple of FTK brews that were popping up using Harpy Dancer, Final Countdown as a hit to the popular Stall deck, Spellbook of Fate as a hit to Spellbook's remaining best card, and Magician of Faith returning from the ban section to 1 copy. Newly semi-limited were Chaos Sorcerer and Lone Fire Blossom, both coming back from limited. Lastly, newly unlimited were Archlord Christia, Constellar Ptolemy M7, Mizuki, Plague Spreader Zombie, TG Striker, Tour Guide from the Underworld, and Fire Formation Tenki, being a wave of cleanup from when the OCG and TCG lists were linked. Overall, this ban list did one thing major, which was killing the Tier 0 version of Dragon Rulers, knocking out a majority of the heavy hitters from the deck as well as cracking down on some of the more toxic cards for events like Countdown and Self-Destruct Button. In addition to this, the Zexal Manga's Volume 4 would release a week later, bringing number 47 Nightmare Shark, a direct attacking rank 3 option that would see niche play for now, but became a lot more relevant later in the year as a game closer. As the first event of the year, YCS Sydney would take place on January 19th, and would ring in the year with no Dragon Ruler decks appearing in the top cut known lists, a first from the previous half a year. The field here had devolved a bit back to the tendencies of the pre-Dragon Ruler era, with Fire Fist being the standout deck of the event, although notably when I say Fire Fist, I primarily mean a Beast Warrior control pile with Fire Fist Bear at the center, so take that with a grain of salt. Anders Co. would take the event on Teleport Karakuri, being a surprise run for the deck to take in the newly weakened metagame, but the meta would soon solidify around its big threats in Fire Fist and Mermail once again as it had in pre-Tachyon formats. This led us into the first core set of the year, and with the meta in a newly reset position, any new strategy with enough support could easily take the spot of the new top deck. Legacy of the Valiant. Release date, January 24th, 2014. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Sylvan, Ghost Trick, Bujin. Impact, A clear push, but not a breakthrough. Legacy of the Valiant would be the first core set of the year, and with it would come both a new archetype as well as a wave of support for 2 archetypes from the tail end of 2013 to try and change something about their position in the metagame. The new archetype was Sylvan, a series of plant monsters that also brought with them a new keyword to the game in the form of Excavate, in which you reveal a set number of cards from the top of your deck to do an effect. Many previous cards that did this, such as Pot of Duality, would also be errataed in the coming months to reflect this change. As for Sylvans, each of the main deck monsters had 2 effects, one that lets you excavate a certain number of cards and send plants you find to the graveyard, putting the rest back on bottom of the deck, and the other triggering when excavated and sent to grave. These included Peacekeeper, who could excavate 1 on summon and revive a level 4 lower plant if excavated, Kumashurmo, who excavated up to 5 on being flipped and pops a spell trap when excavated, Martial Leaf, who excavates up to 2 on normal and pops a monster if excavated, Hermitry, who can excavate 1 once per turn and can rearrange the top 3 of your deck when excavated, Alsay, a rank 8 that can declare a card name once per turn to excavate and either add it to hand if called correctly or send it to the grave if not, and can detach 1 when a card is sent from deck to grave by card effect to put a card on field on either the top or bottom of the deck, and their field spell Mount Sylvania, which can send a plant from hand or field to grave to stack a Sylvan card from deck on top of the deck, and during the opponent's end phase, can excavate 1 like the Sylvan monster effects. This archetype had a lot of good bones to it, but the issue primarily lied in that all of their consistent lines required access to Hermitry, who was level 8. This could be offset slightly thanks to the recent semi-limit of Lonefire Blossom, but general plant support could only take the strategy so far for now. Ghost Trick would receive a new wave of support here in Jack Frost, who can summon itself when the opponent attacks you directly, flipping the attacking monster face down, Mary, who can be discarded when you take damage to summon a Ghost Trick from deck face down, Dullahan, a rank 1 that gains attack for each Ghost Trick you control and can detach 1 on either player's turn to have a monster's attack that turn, able to cycle a Ghost Trick when sent to grave, and Museum, a field spell that prevents set monsters from being attacked, lets monsters attack directly if all opposing monsters are set, and flips any monster that deals battle damage face down. Ghost Trick would continue to see no standalone success, but this wave would bring enough useful stall pieces to the archetype that it would see some consideration as a splash engine into other decks that needed more stall and swarm tools, like Monarch. Bujin would receive another wave here in Arasuda, a Beast Warrior Bujin that can summon itself when a Bujin is banished from field or grave, and can draw 1 and discard 1 if a Bujin was added from deck to hand that turn. Peacock, who can send itself from hand to grave in main phase 2 to search a Bujin. Hare, who can banish itself from grave on either player's turn to protect the Bujin from destruction once that turn, and Tsukiyomi, a light-locked rank 4 that can detach 1 to send your hand to the grave to draw 2 cards, and can summon Beast Warrior Bujins from grave up to the number of materials it had when removed by the opponent's card effect. Bujin, already being in a decent position following the January 1st ban list, would take the support and run with it to be a solid potential strategy in the upcoming metagame, and this support did a lot to reinforce that. Moving into notable standouts, Kalantosa would be a very notable inclusion for the level 2 Earth Beast strategy, able to pop a card on field when summoned by a beast effect. This would also be complemented by Obedience Schooled, able to summon 3 level 2 or lower beasts from deck with their effects negated, being an excellent starter for that strategy too. Tackle Crusader could, when sent to grave, flip a monster face down or bounce a spell trap the opponent controls to hand, being a solid piece in rock decks moving forward. In the same vein, Gorgonic Guardian is a rock-locked rank 3 that can, on either player's turn, detach to drop an opponent's monster's attack to 0 and negate its effects that turn, also able to, on your turn only, destroy a monster with 0 attack. While incredibly powerful, the rank 3 rock restriction was just a bit too much at the time for the card to see play, but it would see rogue level experimentation in later 2016 with another archetype getting legacy support. The generic extra deck pool itself would see a bunch of new additions here that would shape the meta moving forward, such as number 101 Silent Honor Arc, a generic rank 4 that can detach 2 materials to suck up an opponent's special summoned attack position monster as material, bringing one of the best removal tools to the rank 4 pool. I say one of because released alongside Arc was Evil Swarm Exciton Knight, a generic rank 4 that could, once per chain in your main phase or the opponent's battle phase, if the total number of cards your opponent has on field and in hand is more than you, nuke the field except for itself, being one of the best rank 4s due to either being a setup breaker or providing a layer of protection going into the opponent's turn, demanding a removal prior to the battle phase. Lastly, for the Exceed pool would be Downward Magician, a spellcaster locked rank 4 that can also be overlaid onto any rank 3 in the main phase 2, giving 200 for each material and dealing piercing damage, being a solid option for rank 3 decks to convert their used Exceed monsters. In addition to the Exceed pool additions, the generic Synchro pool would also receive Leo, Keeper of the Sacred Tree, a level 10 Synchro that cannot be targeted by card effects except in your main phase 2, becoming the premier level 10 generic Synchro overnight. Rank Up Magic Astral Force is a spell that can target an Exceed to overlay another Exceed onto that is the same type and attribute but 2 ranks higher, and can be added from grave to hand instead of conducting your normal draw for turn. Not seeing any play now, but would find an incredibly interesting niche in the coming months. Shared Ride lets you draw a card every time the opponent adds a card from deck or grave to hand except by drawing, being a searcher equivalent to Max C, seeing side deck play in certain formats where searchers are extremely heavily played. Lastly, Skill Prisoner can target a monster you control to negate any monster effect that targets it that turn, able to be banished from grave to do it again, seeing niche use against certain strategies. YCS Atlanta would be held a week later on February 2nd, and this event would be the first of many this year that would be what we're going to refer to as half-sealed events. For context, this year specifically, we'd see almost every YCS that took place in North America run a standard constructed event until top 16, at which point all players would swap to doing a draft event using whatever the current battle pack was, being War of the Giants for this event. This meant that the top 32 would still be indicative of what decks were performing the best in the meta, but it doesn't mean that the deck that won the event would be the best deck of the event, rather what the winner used to reach top 16. With all of that preamble out of the way, Fire Fist, or more specifically the Bear deck as Konami's official coverage refers to it, would continue to take the lion's share of the top cut, even being piloted by Christian Jorge, who would take first place here after the top 16 draft. Geargia was the other very notable standout here, rising into a dominant position with the discovery of Geargia gear being able to swarm with the Geargiano pieces, standardly being mixed in with Karakuri tuners for synchro access. Hieratic would crack into the top cut with multiple showings here, though notably was the Hieratic Ruler variant in all cases. The Dragon Rulers had found their next core to latch onto and ride into meta viability, though this time was notably less powerful due to only having one of each ruler at their disposal, relying more heavily on the Hieratic side of the deck to do the heavy lifting and swarming. This would lead into the year's first structure deck a week later, which would itself set the trend that this year of structure decks is going to be exclusively focused on bringing new support to previously introduced archetypes, starting with a GX era staple. Cyber Dragon Revolution. Release date, February 7th, 2014. Set type, Structure Deck. Major strategies, Cyber Dragon. Impact, a couple of specifically useful cards. Cyber Dragon Revolution was the first of 3 structure decks this year aimed at taking a meta strategy, or in this case a singular card, and making a full modern strategy out of it. In the case of Cyber Dragon, the idea was to make swarming with them far easier to enable Exceed plays. Their new cards here included Core, who's considered Sidra on field and engrave, search to Cyber Spell Trap on normal, and could, if your opponent controls a monster and you don't, banish itself from grave to summon a Cyber Dragon monster from the deck. Dry, who's considered Sidra on field and engrave, level modulates all Sidras to 5 on normal, and if banished protects the Sidra from being destroyed that turn. Nova, a rank 5 machine-locked Exceed that could detach to summon a Sidra from grave, can banish a Sidra from hand or field to boost itself by 2100 that turn, and floats into a machine fusion on effect destruction by the opponent. And Repair Plant, which can use one effect if you have a Sidra in grave or both if you have 3 or more, being to search a light machine or shuffle back a light machine into deck from grave. While this didn't turn Cyber Dragon into its own viable standalone strategy for the meta, it did do a couple of interesting things. The first was Core, as by being a Cyber Dragon that you could normal summon and ducks under Bottomless, it became a side deck option to use against machine decks to make Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon without risking tripping back row. The second was Nova, as while it wouldn't be played at all for the time being, Nova was one of those cards that would be broken wide open in early 2016 for reasons out of its control, but we'll get to those soon enough. Reprints here included Sidra, Cyber Valley, Super Poly, MST, Trap Stun, and D-Prison to name a few. YCS Berlin would be held 2 weeks later, and from the results here, the Bear deck and Mermail would split the main portion of the representation, with Alpay Engine taking first place using a trap-heavy Reckless Greed build of Mermail. YCS Sao Paulo would be held 2 weeks later, and while this event was also a half draft event, the draft would be everything before top 16, so the decks listed here did not necessarily earn a spot in the top cut by the deck's merits, so take the top cut here with a grain of salt. Carlos Araujo would take the event on Harpy, able to take down 4 rounds in a row in the slimmed down matchup spread. YCS Chicago would be 2 weeks after this, and it was back to using Sealed to play out from top 16, so the top 32 decks here did earn their top spots themselves. Geargia took a sizable portion of the top cut here, once again rivaling the Bear deck and Mermail, with Bujin once again close behind the pack. Tom Mock would take the event, using Bujin to claim his top 16 position before the draft, moving the deck away from its stun roots to a more Exceed-focused strategy with Bujin Carnation covering its board flooding. This event would be directly before the year's Gold Series, and while the past few years had hit a solid groove with the sets, this year's would be different to say the least. Premium Gold. Release date, March 28, 2014. Set type, reprint set. Major strategies, the meta of the past year, OCG imports, all previous Gold Series. Impact, a new take on the Gold Series formula. Premium Gold would be the first full shakeup of the Gold Series formula, not by introducing new rarities, although it did introduce the new Gold Secret Rare, but also by importing OCG cards in the set in addition to the reprints it normally provided, which included a block of 10 cards from each of the previous Gold Series and 21 new to Gold Rare cards. While most of these imports held no impact, there were a couple in particular that were notably impactful, specifically in Beals of the Diabolic Dragon, a Dark Tuner locked level 8 synchro that can't be destroyed in battle and gains attack equal to any damage you take, being a solid inclusion for any dark deck that can make it. In addition to this, Ancient Pixie Dragon would be the manga counterpart to Ancient Fairy Dragon, drawing 1 after activating a field spell and can pop a monster on field if a field spell is active. Lastly for the imports would be the Gimmick Puppet monsters, which we've seen some of previously, but here we would finally receive Dreary Doll, who can special summon herself from grave by banishing another Gimmick Puppet from grave. Magnet Doll, able to special summon itself from hand if your opponent has more monsters than you and you only control Gimmick Puppets. And Junk Puppet, an archetypal revival spell, which gave Gimmick Puppets the material to actually consistently summon their rank 8s, though would still be notably weak in the meta. Reprints here included Lonefire, Honest, Veiler, Light Pulsar, Dark Flare, Eclipse Wyvern, Firefist Tiger King, Solar Recharge, Forbidden Chalice, Forbidden Lance, Tenki, Rhoda, Mirror Force, Torrential, Dad, Caius, Goldsark, Mindcon, Bottomless, Judgment Dragon, Mizuki, Plague Spreader, Ryo, Stardust, Armor Master, Armed Wing, Icarus Attack, Morphing Jar, BLS, Chaos Sorcerer, Raikou, Celestia, and Summoner Monk. In addition to this, a new ban list would drop 3 days later on April 1st, attempting to shake up the meta manually, as the past few sets seem to have done nothing to change what decks were good. Newly banned were Morphing Jar 1 and 2, which was directly targeted at Empty Jar, a rogue level annoyance that never seemed to crack the YCS circuit in recent months, though notably this ban came directly following Morphing Jar's reprint in Premium Gold. Newly limited were Wolfbark, a hit to the Bear deck, Abyss Gund, a hit to Mermail, Rekindling, a hit towards fire decks in general, but more so targeted at Fire King, and Infernity Barrier, a hit to Infernity. Newly semied were Seal of Convocation, a hit to Dragon Ruler's current best build, and Necroface, returning from 1. Lastly, unlimited were Magical Stone Excavation and Primal Seed, 2 points of cleanup. Overall, these hits were effectively slaps on the wrist for most of the top performing decks in the meta, though notably lacked any hits towards Geargia, which was about as old, if not older, than the other decks getting hit. YCS Mexico City would be the testing grounds following the new list, being another sealed top 16, and notably the top 32 for the most part remained unchanged, with the same 4 decks taking the majority of representation yet again. Alejandro Suarez would take the event through the sealed draft, using Mythic Rulers to pilot himself into the top 16, seeing another Dragon Ruler variant that could still compete following the January list, though he did not make his list public. YCS Vegas would be a week later, using the same draft format that would be standard for all draft events for the remainder of the year, and following the success of Mythic Rulers in Mexico City, the deck would rise a bit into the 3rd place representation slot. Geargia and Mermail would continue to take those lion's shares of the top cut, but notably, Firefist would see a rapid decline in its top cut performance following the limit of Wolfbark, which in turn limited the amount of recursive rank 4s the deck could make. Denny Yu would be crowned the winner following the sealed draft, making it the top 16 using Heraldic Ruler, being another example of the ruler strategy's relevance still remaining in whispers in the meta. This would lead to a new import set series premiering 2 weeks later, and though for the most part the OCG import sets up until now have been mostly unimpactful, this one was going to completely upend the balance of the meta as we knew it by introducing multiple meta warping threats. Dragons of Legend. Release date April 25th, 2014. Set type Import Set. Major strategies Timaeus, Hands. Impact the beginnings of a beloved format. Dragons of Legend would be the first set in a long line of OCG import sets themed to the legendary dragons from the Season 4 filler arc of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. As such, the primary card featured for this set would be the Eye of Timaeus, a spell that lets you fuse a Dark Magician monster into a fusion that lists it as material using only that monster, able to access the classic Dark Paladin and Dark Flare Knight, but also the new targets of Dark Magician Girl the Dragon Knight, a fusion of DMG and a dragon, able to discard to pop a face-up card once per turn in either player's turn, and Amulet Dragon, a fusion of Dark Magician and a dragon that can banish any number of spells from grave on summon to boost its attack by 100 for each, floating into a spellcaster engrave on destruction. These were clearly trying to push a Dark Magician deck, but were far too little to get anything off the ground for that to be meta relevant. However, these were not the imports that had people talking, as there were 6 more imports in this set that would all hold meta relevance over the coming months. The first of these would be Curry Bandit, which in the end phase of the turn its normal summon contribute itself to Excavate 5, add a spell trap from those to hand, and put the rest in the grave, being an insane starter for the theorized Sylvan deck, but also holding power as a heavy mill tool. The next would be Mathematician, who on normal summon could bin any level 4 or lower monster from deck to grave, drawing a card if destroyed by battle, being effectively a better version of Armageddon Knight for various strategies that also drew a card after, like Card Trooper, seeing play for these reasons. Next up was Wiretap, a counter trap that negates a trap and shuffles it back into deck for no cost, being solid as most counter traps that did something similar required a cost of some kind. The last 3, however, would be the most impactful of all. Fire and Ice Hand were a duo of cards that, on destruction, pop a monster in Fire Hand's case or a spell trap in Ice Hand's, and if you do, floats into a copy of the other. These two would be a powerful control engine of sorts that would be splashed into almost everything over the coming months, representing 6 total pops if they go uncountered. Lastly, Soul Charge was a spell that could, for the cost of 1,000 life points a monster and your battle phase that turn, summon as many monsters as you'd like from the graveyard. Needless to say, Amass Monster Reborn was incredibly powerful, and on top of that, it was available at 3 copies on release, meaning that every deck could have access to Amass Board Revival for the cost of simple life points, which at this stage were becoming more and more of an expendable resource. YCS Paris would be held the same weekend, though a major point of note here needs to be that due to a logistical issue, Dragons of Legend would not be legal for the main event of this particular YCS. Peter Gross would take the event on Mermail, being his 3rd YCS win after his 2 wins in 2012. The new cards of Dragons of Legend would have to wait just a bit longer to rock the meta, but they would have to share the stage with the next core set released 3 weeks later. Primal Origin. Release date May 17th, 2014. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Artifact, Sylvan, Bujin. Impact, ending the Zexal era with a tip of the hat. Primal Origin would be the final core set of the Zexal era, and if it wanted to end the era with a bang, it absolutely accomplished that in spades, introducing a new meta archetype in addition to providing support waves to multiple other archetypes both in the meta and just outside of it, completely shaking things up prior to the WCQ circuit taking place over the next few months. The new archetype here was Artifact, a series of monsters that could be set in the spell trap zone, summoning themselves if popped on the opponent's turn while set there, including Moraltalk, who pops a face-up opponent's card when summoned on the opponent's turn, Beagletalk, who pops up to 2 of your set cards if summoned on the opponent's turn, Scythe, a TCG exclusive that locks an opponent's extra deck summons if summoned on the opponent's turn, Durendal, a rank 5 that can detach a material to change an opponent's activated monster or normal spell trap effect to destroy a spell trap the opponent controls, and can detach one to mulligan both players' hands in either turn, with both effects being tied to the same once per turn restriction. Ignition, a quick play spell that pops a spell trap on the field, then sets an artifact monster from deck to the spell trap zone, able to skip the opponent's next battle phase if popped while set. And Sanctum, a trap that summons an artifact from deck, triggering their summon effect if it's the opponent's turn, and pops a card on field if destroyed while set. Artifacts were a solid engine of removal pieces, specifically in the case of Moraltok with Sanctum, being considered as a splash engine for various decks in the meta to buff up their removal options. Sylvan would receive a solid second wave of support here in Cherub Sprout, able to excavate up to 2 on special summon, and able to special summon a level 1 plant from deck if excavated. Sage Koya, able to be special summoned from hand if a Sylvan is sent to grave except in the damage step, can excavate 1 once per turn, and can recur a Sylvan spell trap if excavated. Princess Sprout, a TCG exclusive that can tribute herself to excavate 1, send it to grave regardless of the results, and place a Sprout monster in grave on top of the deck, and if excavated, special summons herself with any level between 1 and 8. Aurea, a rank 7 that can send a plant from hand or field to grave to reorder cards on top of the deck equal to the level of the sent monster, and can detach 1 to excavate up to 3 cards, send any plants to grave, and bounce that many cards on field to hand. And Charity, a spell that lets you draw 3 then stack 2, including a Sylvan, from hand on top of the deck, stacking every card in hand if you don't have a Sylvan. This wave would iron out a ton of the issues that Sylvan had from its initial debut, with Sage and Princess specifically filling a major void in the excavation access and Charity reading almost like a custom card for the archetype. But whether or not it would perform would have to be seen in the YCS and WCQ circuit. Bujin would receive a couple of new cards here in Harume, a Beast Warrior Bujin that must be special summoned by banishing a Bujin from grave except itself, and rips a card from both players' hand on destruction. Sinew, a TCG exclusive that can banish itself from grave to boost a Bujin by the attack of the battling monster, having battle damage from that battle. And Amaterasu, a 3 material rank 4 that can detach 1 to either summon a banished level 4 or lower on your turn, or add a banished level 4 or lower to hand on the opponent's turn. The support would be solid for Bujin all around, giving the deck an in-archetype honest of sorts as well as more rank 4 swarming options, seeing a boost in the deck's play rate from this support. Moving into the standalones, Traptrix would receive Dionea, with the standard Traptrix immunity, special summons a Traptrix from grave on normal, and sets a whole normal trap from grave on special, being an incredibly powerful piece to pair with a previously released Murmelio for a splash engine. Madolche would receive Angeli, with the standard Madolche reshuffle effect, and contribute herself to summon a Madolche from deck, shuffling it back into the deck at the end phase of your next turn, which was an incredible starter for Madolche by giving the deck immediate access to Hootcake, who already had a monster engraved to banish thanks to Angeli's tribute not triggering the shuffle back effect. Majesty's Fiend was a counterpart to the previously released Vanity's Fiend, locking monster effects while on the field, being a solid counter strategy to various decks in many different metagames. Number 103 Ragnazero was the new rank 4 option, able to detach to pop a monster who has a different attack than its original, drawing a card if you do, being a solid tech choice for countering out some decks. Number 80 Rhapsody and Berserk was another rank 4 option, able to detach 1 to banish a card in the opponent's grave, and can equip itself onto another Exceed to boost that monster by 1200 attack, being considered as another tech choice for the banish effect primarily. Karen Gorgon was yet another new rank 4 option, able to detach 1 to change any card's singular target to itself if able, being primarily played as one of the strongest rank 4 bodies on 2450 that still had a decent effect attached. Exceed's Universe is a trap that sends 2 Exceeds to grave to summon a non-number Exceed with a rank that is equal to the combined ranks of the sent Exceeds or 1 less, attaching itself as material to that monster, being mostly niche in its applications, but did give rank 4 focus decks the ability to access the rank 7 and 8 pool in a roundabout way. Evo Singularity was a new trap for the Evol archetype, able to summon an Evil Tsar from the extra deck and attach an Evo Tile and Evil Tsar from grave to it as material, being a powerful cheat out option for the floundering strategy. Lastly, and the ban played on, was a continuous trap that locks summoning of monsters with the same level or rank as monsters you already controlled, being a solid floodgate option against various Exceed strategies. YCS Philadelphia would be the same weekend, being another top 16 sealed event, and though Geargia would continue to dominate the space, a very clear change was present from the top 32. The engines present in the past couple of packs would pop up in various strategies throughout the top 32, but most notably would be mixed with each other to form their own standalone decks, like Traptrix Hands, Artifact Traptrix, and what would become the face of the format in retrospect, Hat. short for Hand Artifact Trap Tricks, which would mix the titular engines together to form a tight control package, with the hands providing their monster and spell trap pops in combination with board swarming, the artifacts providing disruption and rank 5 access through Moral and Beagle Talk, and Trap Tricks providing access to Bottomless and Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare, while also providing spell trap removal and rank 4 access. This deck would become the face of this period of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, known as Hat format, which would be considered one of the few times in post-5Ds Yu-Gi-Oh! Where a deck that is very much a control strategy would be the dominant force on the metagame. Chris LeBlanc would win the event following the top 16 draft, using Madolche to reach top 16, sporting not only the new Angeli line, but also Fire and Ice Hand to help clean up board states, marking the player's second YCS victory following Providence in 2012. This would lead into the next structure deck over a month later, and with most players using the results from the YCS to prepare for the upcoming WCQ circuit, this structure deck would be the last opportunity to provide any kind of shakeup to the already shattered apart metagame. Realm of Light. Release date, June 27th, 2014. Set type, Structure Deck. Major strategies, Light Sworn. Impact, a revitalization to millers. Realm of Light would be the second of 3 structure decks aimed at providing new support to previously meta archetypes, this time being Light Sworn, who will receive 3 new monsters to bolster their ranks, being Raiden, a tuner that's able to mill 2 to boost himself by 200 for each Light Sworn milled this way, milling 2 more in the end phase, Minerva, a tuner who searches a Light Dragon on normal whose level is less than or equal to your Light Sworn names in grave, milling 2 in the end phase, and mills 1 when sent from hand or deck to grave. And Michael, a level 7 Light Lock Synchro that can pay 1,000 to banish a card on field, shuffles back any number of Light Sworns in grave on destruction, gaining 300 life points for each, and mills 3 in the end phase. These 3 would each see their own usage both within Lightsworn strategies and in general, with Raiden specifically seeing the most usage due to being a miller that is also a tuner for Synchro Pool access, making him extremely useful for various strategies. Reprints here included JD, Celestia, Jane, Lila, Gareth, Wolf, Aaron, Lumina, Arcus, Raiko, Honest, Blackwing Zephyros, Necrogardna, Solar Recharge, Charge, Foolish, and Breakthrough Skill. The WCQ circuit for the year would begin with the European WCQ on June 29th, and for the most part we'd see similar results to Philadelphia, with Geargia remaining the top deck and Hat remaining in the top 3. There were a couple of other decks, however, in the top cut worth talking about. Sylvan would see its first set of premier event tops, seeing 3 total, with Sage Koya ironing out many of the archetype's boss monster issues and Sylvan Charge being one of the best enablers the deck could have asked for, utilizing all of the archetype's power cards in addition to plant staples like Lonefire Blossom and Rose Archer, as well as the mass excavation and dump tool that was Curry Bandit, fitting extremely nicely into the archetype. The other breakout success here would be Lightsworn Ruler, tying Hat for representation and utilizing the newly released Lightsworn structure deck with Raiden and Minerva in tow, similarly utilizing Curry Bandit for the massive mills he provided. Eugen Height would take the event on Mermail, showing the deck can still perform in the metagame despite the heavily shifting landscape around it. The South American WCQ would be the same weekend, and Hat would see a far more pronounced performance here, taking a fourth of the representation at 8 slots from the top 32. Roger Moran would take the event on Machina Gadget, being a surprising run for the deck to take, notably playing the singular copy that was allowed of Radox, providing Grave Revival and rank 7 access. Extremely notably here, looking at the top decks, Hat variants took 11 total top spots, with 17 decks across the 32 running the hand package in some shape or form, showing the engine's dominance and staying power. The Oceania WCQ would be the next weekend, but unfortunately due to poor coverage we only know the top 4 here, where Geargia would clear into 3 of the 4 spots, with Donald Thompson defeating all of them to take the event with Fire Fist Artifact Hand, trading out the Trap Tricks engine of most Hat builds for a Fire Fist package. The Central America WCQ would be the same weekend, and Dolce would have a surprising showing here, taking 5 top spots and landing in second for representation. More notably were the Hat cores, which managed to weave their way into the top cut seamlessly here, with hands appearing in 9 lists, Trap Tricks in 7, and Artifacts in 5. Jose Lagunes would take the event on Mermail, being another surprising victory for the deck to grab. Lastly would be the North American WCQ, being held the next weekend, and unfortunately most of the coverage of this particular event has been lost to time, though we do know some of the goings on through attendee testament. Though the deck was solid, most pro players in the North American circuit were actively lying about the strength of Sylvan as a combo deck in the meta, saving their list for this specific event, and it would perform well, being one of the most represented decks that we know of from this particular event, with some innovations to the strategy including Blaster being used as a rank 7 enabler with Sage Koya, Miracle Fertilizer putting in insane work due to the ruling that its destruction effect will not trigger if a monster that it revives is used as Exceed material, and Spore being used not only as a tuner, but as Exceed material for rank 8s by banishing a Sage Koya for its summon. Corey McDuffie would take the event on hat, being the first premier event win for the rapidly rising strategy, notably playing Pot of Dichotomy thanks to its various types the deck utilized. The day after the NAWCQ, the ban list would be updated, notably being the first time a non-emergency ban list would take effect on a date that wasn't the first of the month, being July 14th, though clearly the list was delayed as to not interfere with the WCQ events already scheduled. Newly limited were Geargia Gear, the primary combo piece of the Geargia strategy, and Goyo Guardian, being released from his ban status. Newly semi-limited were Formula Synchron, Magician of Faith, and Rhoda, all coming back from 1. Lastly, newly unlimited were Dimensional Prison and Mirror Force, sparking a bit of debate around these two specifically due to their natures as powerful battle traps, especially Mirror Force, but in retrospect, that call was correct, as their time was coming to an end. We were standing on the precipice of a new era, and though it wouldn't officially start for another month, the year's starter deck would give us a hint as to what was in store. Space Time Showdown. Release date July 11th, 2014. Set type Starter Deck. Major strategies: Summoners, Magicians, Empowered Warriors. Impact.
What the hell is that?
Space Time Showdown would be the year's starter deck, and as such would also be our first look at the new mechanic for the Arc 5 era, Pendulums. These monster spell hybrids can either be summoned as normal or set in one of the newly coined Pendulum Scales, a new zone placed on each side of the board, with a unique effect for where it was placed. When destroyed, pendulums go to the extra deck face up rather than the graveyard, and most importantly, once per turn, if you have 2 pendulum monsters in your scales, you can perform a pendulum summon, allowing you to summon as many monsters as you'd like from hand or extra deck to the field whose levels are between the 2 scale numbers. For example, the pendulum monsters introduced here, Stargazer and Timegazer Magicians, have a scale of 1 and 8 respectively. That would mean that while they're in scale, you can pendulum summon out any monsters between the levels of 2 and 7, and upon finding this out, the community lost their collective minds. The idea of being able to summon out massive bosses for effectively free signaled the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! As many called it. However, this was completely overblown. There was experimentation initially with cards like Jinzo and Mist Valley Apex Avian being cheated out, but the reality of the situation was that because of the lack of pendulum monsters, the mechanic was nowhere near as busted as people would think initially. Aside from these two, the only new release here worth noting was Supply Squad, a continuous spell that lets you draw a card once per turn when a monster is destroyed, which would see some play in the coming months with certain strategies. Lastly, with the release of this starter deck, there were a couple of adjustments to the master rules alongside the pendulum changes. The first of these was there could now be an active field spell on each side of the field, meaning that you and your opponent no longer had to fight for field spell priority, though up until this point that rarely happened to begin with. The second, and far more important to the long term of the game, was that the player going first no longer drew for the start of their first turn. This was an incredibly important change, as now there was a real sacrifice for choosing to go first over going second, and though most players would still choose to set up first over the extra card moving forward, it did introduce an interesting dynamic into the decision process. Following this year's starter deck, Battle Pack 3 Monster League would release on August 1st, being most notable for shifting what draft pack would be used for YCSs for the remainder of the year, but also had an interesting twist for drafts using it, as all monsters would be considered all types, being exceptionally interesting as a sealed draft product for that reason, in addition to reprints of Levier the Sea Dragon, Daigusto Emerald, Gagaga Cowboy, Diamond Direwolf, and Ghost Trick Alucard. The World Championship would be a week later from August 9th to the 10th, and this would be one of the most interesting years in terms of coordination for Worlds, as it would be the first time that both ban lists had to be taken into account. In previous years, what the ban list would encompass was never really up for discussion since both regions followed the same list. However, since the TCG-OCG split, Worlds would need to have a ban list that effectively combined the harshest hits from both regions, leaving some decks in a much weaker or stronger state than initially expected, especially with the removal of exclusives from both pools. Because of this, and despite having multiple hits on the ban list, Infernity would move to be the most successful deck at the event, taking 3 of the top 8 as well as the World Champion title piloted by Sahabi Carradine of Canada, marking himself as the 2014 World Champion. This would be the final event of the Zexal era, fittingly enough, and as we moved into the next era of the game, the core set kickoff would do more than just reset the previous meta, it was going to obliterate it into the stratosphere. A huge shout out to my Dark Law level patrons, Dammit Marco, Jukes, McJaga, NTBYGO, Otaku GamerX, Prinrin, Ryza339, and Takamine Fujiwara, as well as all of my other patrons over on patreon.com. If you'd like to support the channel, consider following me on Patreon, where support tiers start at as little as $1 and you get access to all my videos a day early. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel, that way you don't miss out on any future videos. Every subscription helps out more than you think. Thank you all again, and I'll see you next time.